cooler was leaking again. I noticed it the second morning at BLACKROCK, when I sat up in my sleeping bag and put my bare foot down in cold water that had crossed half the tent floor. I said something under my breath that would have made my mother slap me, and then I said it again louder because there was nobody around to hear it. That was the whole point of being there. I had come up to BLACKROCK bald because my wife had told me she needed the summer to think, and my wife's version of thinking involved a 2-bedroom rental in Bend and the kids for 8 weeks, and a schedule of visitation that her sister had drawn up on a legal pad. Erin had never in her life needed a legal pad to figure out what she wanted. She had needed one to figure out what she was going to do to me. There is a difference, and I could feel the difference in the way she handed it to me, folded twice across the kitchen counter that I had installed with my own 2 hands the year Colton was born. I was 36 years old. I welded for a living. My hands looked like the hands of a man 20 years older, and I had a permanent squint on the left side from arc flash that I had not treated properly when I was 23. I had 2 boys, one 9 and one 6, and a mortgage on a house that my wife was currently sleeping in without me. I had a 2007 Chevy Silverado with 180,000 miles on it, and a topper I had put on myself. I had a canvas wall tent that my father had left me, the kind you set up with poles and stakes and a wood stove pipe going out the back, and I had loaded it into the truck bed on a Tuesday morning in June, while our neighbor, Mrs. Delacroix, watched from her porch with the expression of a woman who was going to have a lot to say to Erin the next time she saw her. That was how I got to BLACKROCK. I say that because none of the rest of what happened makes any sense unless a person understands I was not in my right mind when I drove up there. BLACKROCK Bald sat at the end of a Forest Service road in the Ochoco foothills, about 2 hours east of where I lived. The road was a graded gravel 2-track called Forest Road 22, and if you followed it past the first 2 turnouts and up the switchback where the pines thinned into juniper, you came out on a bare shoulder of rock that looked south over about 30 miles of nothing. My father had brought me up there when I was 8. Erin and I had brought the boys up there twice. The second time, Colton had thrown a rock over the edge and cried when he could not see it land because he thought he had thrown something that could not be caught again, and I had told him that was what rocks were for. That was the last thing I remembered about the last good day I had spent at BLACKROCK, and I had been trying not to remember it the entire drive up. The spot I liked sat about a quarter-mile back from the actual Bald, in a stand of ponderosa that opened onto a fire ring somebody had built from stacked basalt back in the 80s. The fire ring had a piece of rebar sticking out of it for hanging a pot. There was a down log at one edge, half-rotted, that made a natural bench. Past the log, the ground sloped down into a draw where a seasonal creek ran in April and was dry by July. In July, when I was there, it was dry. I had picked that spot because it was mine. It had been mine and my father's, and then it had been Erin's and mine, and now it was going to be mine alone, and I was going to sit in it until it fit again. The first day I set up the tent and put the wood stove in and cut kindling for the evening, and I did not cry. I want to make that clear. I want to make it clear because of what happens later when I finally did cry, and I do not want anybody to think it was over Erin. When I finally cried at BLACKROCK, it was over something else entirely, and I need the timeline right in my head. The first day, I did not cry. I ate a can of Nally's chili with a plastic spoon. I drank 3 cans of Rainier from the leaking cooler. I read 40 pages of a paperback Western I had picked up at a gas station and could not have told you the title of. When it got dark, I sat on the rotted log with my back against a rock, and I watched the stars come up over the ridge to the east, and I did not think about Erin at all, or Colton, or Henry. I thought about welding. I thought about the seam I had run on a stair stringer that morning before I left, and how I had gotten a hair too much penetration on the last inch, and how I would fix it when I got back. I thought about the shop cat, whose name was neither here nor there, because my apprentice was the kind of person who named cats, things like that. Then I went to bed. The second morning was the cooler. The cooler was a green Coleman that my father had also left me, and it had a plastic drain plug on the side that had cracked in the wildfire summer of 2020 when I had stored it in the garage, and the garage had gotten to 120 degrees for a week straight, I had duct taped the plug, and the duct tape had held for 4 years, and now it was not holding. I stepped in the meltwater and swore. Then I climbed out of the tent to piss and to see what kind of morning I had, which is when I saw the truck. It was a white Ford F-250 with a bed cover, parked about 80 feet from my tent in the flat area between my site and the trail down to the bald. There had been no truck there when I went to bed. I would have heard a truck. I sleep light in the woods, always have, and BLACKROCK is quiet enough that a truck engine at that distance would have brought me up out of a coma. But there it was, in the growing gray light, glossy and clean like it had been driven off the lot the day before. Oregon plates. I did not memorize them. That is one of the things I still hate myself for. There was nobody in the truck. There was nobody around the truck. There was no tent set up yet, no fire ring, no cooler, no cot, no chair. The truck had been parked, and then whoever had parked it had walked off. I stood there in my long johns and my unlaced boots, with my dick in my hand, and I looked at that truck and I thought, all right, so somebody else is here. It happens. BLACKROCK is not private land. I have run into other people up here before. It is fine. That is what I thought. Then I looked past the truck, down the slope toward the tree line, and I saw the woman standing there watching me. She was maybe 40 yards away, in the shadow of a big ponderosa, and she was so still that if she had not been wearing a blue dress, I might not have seen her at all. She had her arms at her sides. Her hair was long and dark, and she wore it loose down her back. I could not see her face from that distance. She could see mine, though, because she was watching me piss. I finished. I turned my back. I zipped up. When I turned around again, she was gone. I want to be clear here. I did not think she had disappeared. I thought she had walked around the far side of the ponderosa and gone back to wherever her party was setting up. That was the natural conclusion. That is what a rational man in his skivvies at 7 a.m. tells himself, and I was still a rational man that morning. I told myself I had gotten a look at a stranger during a private moment and that both of us were embarrassed. I told myself I would go over later and apologize and see if they needed a fire ring, since mine was the good one. I made coffee on the wood stove. I sat on the log and drank it. I watched the truck. The family came up out of the draw about an hour later. There were 4 of them, plus the dog, and they came up the game trail on foot from the direction of the seasonal creek, which meant they had walked in from somewhere down below, which meant they had not driven the truck up because the truck was already parked when I woke up. That did not compute for me at the time. It should have. I write it down now, and it does not compute for me now either. But at the time I filed it under weird and moved on, because they were walking up the slope toward their truck and they were within earshot, and I had to decide whether to say hello. The man came first. He was tall. I would put him at 6'4", 6'5", and thin in a way that made him look taller. He wore Wranglers and a snap-button shirt tucked in, and a straw cowboy hat that looked new. His face was long. He had a mustache that had gone gray at the corners. He walked with his shoulders set high, like a man carrying something heavy on his back that was not actually there. He did not look at me. The woman came behind him. She was the one from the tree, in the blue dress, and up close her face had a quality I could not name at first. She was younger than the man by 10 years or more. Her eyes were set wide, and they moved slow. When she looked at me, she did not smile, and she did not look away. She looked at me the way a cow looks at a fence. There were 2 children with them, a girl, maybe 10, a boy, maybe 7. The girl walked in front, holding the boy's hand, and the boy walked behind her, looking at his own boots. Both children were dressed in what I would call church clothes. The girl in a dress the same blue as the woman's, the boy in a white button-up with a black clip-on tie. Neither of them was carrying anything. Neither of them was talking. The dog came last. It was a big red heeler with something else in it, maybe Rottweiler, and it had one milky eye and no collar. It walked at the man's heel without a leash and without ever once looking up at him. They walked past me at a distance of about 40 feet. Not one of them turned their head. The children did not look at me. The woman did not look at me. Not this time. Only the dog looked, and it looked at me the way the woman had looked at me from the tree line, which is to say, it looked at me like something it had decided about. They stopped at the truck. The man opened the tailgate. Whatever was in the bed under the cover, he did not take it out. He stood at the tailgate with his back to me, and he waited. The woman and the children stood in a small cluster behind him. The dog sat down. Nobody said anything. I lifted my coffee mug, and I called out, "Morning." The man turned his head. Not his body, just his head, slow, until it was pointed at me, over his shoulder. He held it there for what felt like a long time. Long enough that I had time to notice that his eyes were the same wide-set, slow eyes as the woman's. Long enough that I had time to feel the coffee mug getting cold in my hand. Then he said, "The Halveks don't require assistance." That was what he said. Word for word. He said it in a normal speaking voice, not loud, not angry, like he was informing me of the location of a public restroom. Then he turned back to the tailgate. I stood there, with the mug in my hand, and I felt my face do the thing it does when I have been talked down to by somebody I do not want to fight. It is a slow flush that starts under the ears. Erin used to be able to see it happening before I could feel it. She used to lay a hand on my forearm when it started and say, in a voice like she was diffusing something, "Honey, honey, honey." There was no hand on my forearm at BLACKROCK. There was just me and the mug and a family of 4 setting up camp 80 feet from mine at 7 a.m., whose father had just told me that they did not require assistance and whose dog had one milky eye. I decided in that moment that I was not going to speak to them again. I decided that I was going to eat my breakfast, and I was going to walk down to the Bald and read my paperback, and I was going to pretend they did not exist. There is a schoolyard rule that says if you are here first, you have the moral high ground. I had been here first by about 20 hours. I clung to that. I made breakfast, 2 eggs on the wood stove in a cast iron pan, with a piece of the bread I had brought toasted on top of the stove and slathered with butter that was going soft in the cooler water. The whole time I ate, I watched them out of the corner of my eye. They were setting up. They had a nylon dome tent, not a canvas one, and it was blue. All their gear was blue. Sleeping pads, blue. Camp chairs, blue. A tarp they laid over a picnic area, blue. The children stood and watched the man work, and the woman stood and watched the man work, and none of them offered to help him, and none of them talked to each other. The man moved fast and efficient. He had the tent up in about 6 minutes. He did not use a mallet. He drove the stakes in with the heel of his boot. At one point, while he was staking out the last corner, the girl said something. It was the first sound any of them had made besides his one line to me. I could not make out the words. Her voice was thin and reedy. When she said it, the man stopped what he was doing and stood up straight and turned all the way around and looked at her. He did not move. He just looked at her. The girl looked at the ground. The boy started to cry. Not loud, just tears rolling. He did not make a sound. The man went back to staking the tent. I put my fork down. I remember that. I put my fork down on the tin plate, and the sound it made was the loudest thing that had happened at BLACKROCK in the last 5 minutes. I remember thinking, get up, drive down, call somebody. And then I remember thinking, call somebody about what? About a man giving his kid a hard look while he set up a tent. About a dog with a milky eye. About a woman in a dress who watched me piss and then disappeared behind a tree. I remember thinking, you are going to sound insane. So I did not get up and drive down. That is on me, and I know it is on me, and there is no way to say it that makes it not on me. If I had gotten in the truck at 8 a.m. on my second day at BLACKROCK and driven to the nearest place with cell service and called a sheriff and said, hey, there is a family up here on the Bald that is giving me a bad feeling, then whatever else was going to happen would not have happened, or it would have happened to somebody else. I do not know which is worse. I go back and forth on it. Some mornings I go with one, some mornings I go with the other. Erin used to say that guilt was one of my hobbies. She was not wrong. But this is not a hobby. This is the thing that is in the room with me now. Anyway, I did not leave. I finished my breakfast. I made a second cup of coffee. I put the paper back in my back pocket, and I walked down the trail past the Halveck family, not looking at them, and I walked out to the bald, and I sat on the edge with my legs hanging over the drop, and I read. I stayed out there for 4 hours. It was a hot day, 70-something and no clouds. Down in the valley, the sagebrush went blue with heat haze. A pair of ravens came and went along the ridge, cursing at each other in that raven way. I read 40 more pages of the Western without absorbing any of them. I ate the sandwich I had made. I drank water. I did not think about Aaron. I thought about the man saying the Halvecks don't require assistance. I thought about the way he had said it. I thought about the way he had said Halvecks, plural, like it was the name of a company. Around 2 p.m., I walked back up. The camp was set up. The tent was pitched. The blue tarp was strung between two ponderosas over a picnic area, and the picnic area had a table that had not been there before and had not come out of the truck as far as I could tell. It was a folding aluminum table with the paint chipped off. On the table were 4 white plastic plates, 4 white plastic cups, and a jar of something dark. Nobody was at the table. Nobody was at the tent. The truck was still where it had been. The dog was lying under the truck with its head on its paws. The man was standing about 30 feet from my tent. He was standing in the fire ring. Not next to it, in it. He had his boots planted on the ash, and he was looking down at the piece of rebar that was welded into the stone at chest height, the one for hanging a pot, and he was turning his head very slowly to follow the rebar with his eyes, as if he were reading something written on it. I stopped on the trail. I said, "Can I help you with something?" I did not phrase it as a question. He heard it as a statement. He kept turning his head. When he had followed the rebar all the way to its end, he lifted his eyes and looked at me, and he said, "The Halvecks admire craftsmanship." That was the second thing he said to me. I said, "My dad built that." He said, "The Halvecks appreciate a father's work." We stood there for about 10 seconds. He did not step out of the firing. I did not walk closer. The heat came off the top of the day in that particular Ochoco way that makes it feel like the sky is a piece of tin somebody is holding 6 feet above your head. A grasshopper made a noise off to my left. Then the man stepped out of the fire ring, wiped ash off the bottom of his boots on the rocks, and walked back to his campsite without looking at me again. I sat down on the log. I sat there for a while. I want to try to describe, if I can, what was wrong with him, because I have been trying to describe it for 2 years, and I have not gotten close, and if I do not do it now, I never will. It was not that he was rude. Rude I could handle. Rude I could have gotten in his face about. It was not that he was scary in the ordinary way, big and mean and looking for a fight. I have known men like that. I have worked with them. You know what to do with them. It was that he moved wrong. The thing about a body is that when you have spent a lifetime around bodies, you know what a body does when it does not know somebody is looking. You know that a man carrying a folding chair walks a certain way, that a woman waiting for her husband to finish shaves her weight from foot to foot, that a child seeing a beetle stops and squats down. Bodies leak. They tell on themselves all the time. You do not have to think about it. You just read it. The way you read weather. The Halvecks did not leak. The Halvecks did not tell on themselves. The man never once, in the 15 minutes I had watched him set up that tent, made a movement that was not directly required for the task at hand. He did not stretch. He did not shift his weight. He did not scratch. He did not shade his eyes against the sun. He did not look up at the sound of the raven. When he needed a stake, his hand went to the stake, and when he did not need a stake, his hand hung at his side and did nothing. The children were the same. The woman was the same. Nobody swatted at a fly. Nobody yawned. Nobody looked at anything for pleasure. The only thing at that campsite that behaved like a living creature was the dog, and the dog was watching me. I did not understand all of that in real time. In real time, I sat on the log, and I felt sick to my stomach, and I could not have told you why. In real time, I finished my second coffee, cold now, and I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I was tired and lonely and angry at my wife, and I was seeing monsters where there were only weird people. I told myself I was going to give them the rest of the afternoon to prove me wrong. That was my plan. I would give them the afternoon. If they did not do anything actually threatening, I would let it go. I would stay one more night and drive out in the morning. There is no shame in cutting a trip short. I told myself this out loud, on the log, so the log would hear me be reasonable. That was around 2:30 p.m. By 4 p.m., the woman had taken her dress off. I was inside my tent restringing the guy line on the north side because the wind had pulled a stake loose, and when I ducked back out with the mallet in my hand, she was standing next to the folding table in her underwear. Not sunbathing. Standing, facing my tent, her back to her own tent, her arms at her sides. I dropped the mallet. I do not know how long I stood there before I looked away. It was long enough that I remember details I do not want to remember. She was pale in the way that indoor people are pale, blue veins on the insides of her arms, and she had a birthmark under her collarbone the shape of Michigan. She was not thin and she was not heavy. She was somebody's mother. She was somebody I would have passed in the parking lot of a Fred Meyer and not looked at twice. And she was standing in the sun 40 feet from me in her underwear, watching my tent, not moving. I looked away. I looked at the ground. I said, out loud, "Ma'am." She did not answer. I did not look up. I said, "Ma'am, you got kids over there." She did not answer. I finally looked up because I had to know if she had heard me. She was still looking at my tent, not at me, at the tent. As if I had gone inside the tent when I dropped the mallet, and she was waiting for me to come back out. Her eyes had that same slow-motion quality. Her mouth was slightly open. There was a fly on her cheek, and she was not brushing it away. Behind her, at the picnic table under the tarp, the man was sitting on a folding chair with his back to me, watching the woods. The children were nowhere. I mean it. The children were not there. I did not see them at the tent. I did not see them at the truck. I did not see them at the fire ring or under the truck with the dog, and the dog was still there, still with its head on its paws, still watching me. The children were gone. I said her name. I do not know why I said her name. I did not know her name. I said, "Mrs. Halveck." At that, the woman blinked. It was the first time I had seen her blink. Both eyelids at once, slow, like a lizard. Then she said, "The Halvecks are here." I said, "Where are your children?" She said, "The Halvecks are here." I said, "Ma'am, please put your dress on." She said, "The Halvecks are here." I got in my truck. I did not pack up. I did not roll up the tent. I did not put out the fire in the wood stove, though the wood stove was already out because I had not lit it since morning. I grabbed my truck keys off the tailgate where I had left them, and I got in the cab and I turned the ignition and I put it in reverse and I got out of there. I left my father's canvas tent, and I left the leaking Coleman, and I left the paperback Western on the log with a rock on top of it to keep it from blowing away. I got about half a mile down Forest Road 22 before I realized I had no cell service and would not have any for another 12 miles. And I got another half mile past that before I realized that if I drove out, I was leaving her and the boy and the girl. If I drove out and did nothing else, I would have to live with what happened to those children. I pulled over into a turnout. I sat in the truck for a while. Here is a thing about me that Erin used to say was my worst quality. I overthink. She said it the way you say a person is a drinker. She meant it as a diagnosis. She meant it to explain why I never made a hard decision without walking around it 12 times, and why sometimes, by the time I had walked around it 12 times, the decision had gotten up and left without me. She was right about that. She was right about a lot of things I did not want her to be right about, which is why I was up on the bald in the first place. But there, in the turnout, I did not overthink. I made the decision fast, faster than I have ever made a decision. I turned the truck around, and I drove back up. I told myself, while I drove up, that I was going to grab the boy and grab the girl and put them in the cab of my truck. That was the plan. Get the children, drive them out, explain later. If the man tried to stop me, I would put him down. I had a buck knife on my belt and a tire iron under the seat, and I would put him down. If the woman tried to stop me, she was in her underwear and the dog was old. That was my plan going up the switchback. By the time I got back to the campsite, everything had changed. The truck was still there. The tent was still there. The blue tarp was still up. The folding table was still set with its 4 plates and 4 cups, and the jar of dark something. But the man was gone. The woman was gone. The dog was gone. And the children were sitting at the table. They had not been at the table when I left. I know this because I looked hard. I called for them. I said, "Where are your children?" They had not been there. They were there now. The girl on the left, the boy on the right, both of them facing the table, both of them with their little hands folded in their laps, both of them staring straight ahead at nothing. They still had not eaten. The plates were still empty. The cups were still empty. The jar of dark something sat in the middle of the table, and I could see now, in the slanting afternoon light, that it was full of what looked like molasses. I pulled the truck up to about 20 feet from the picnic tarp, and I killed the engine, and I got out. I said, "Hey, kids." They did not move. They did not look up. I said, "Where's your dad?" They did not move. I walked closer. I stopped about 10 feet from the table. The boy had a small scab on his knee. The girl had a chip in her front tooth. The boy was breathing through his mouth. The girl was not, and I watched her chest for a while, until I saw it rise slow and fall slow. She was breathing. She was just breathing very slowly. I said, "Sweetheart, look at me." The girl looked at me. Her eyes. There were eyes back inside them, and there had not been eyes back inside the mother's eyes, and there had not been eyes back inside the father's eyes, and there were eyes back inside hers. It was the first look any of them had given me that had a person behind it, and the person behind it was not a person I could help. The person behind it had been somewhere for a long time, and I could not get to her. She looked at me, and I understood, in the way you understand a scent before you understand the word for the scent, that whatever had happened to these children had happened before they got to BLACKROCK and had been happening for years. Then she said, "The Halvecks are having supper." She said it in the same voice the woman had said it in. Flat, same rhythm, same distance. And then she looked back at the empty plate in front of her. I stepped closer. I got right up next to the table. I got low on one knee, so I would not be looming over them. I put my hand on the edge of the table and I said, quiet as I could, "I'm going to take you two out of here. Okay. I'm going to put you in my truck. It is going to be all right." The boy started to cry again, silent like before, tears just rolling. His hands stayed folded in his lap. The girl said, "The Halvecks are having supper." The dog barked once from somewhere behind the truck. I turned my head. The man was standing between me and my truck. I have not been able to figure out in the 2 years since how he got there without me hearing him. I had been maybe 3 feet from a piece of dry ponderosa duff when he crossed the 20 feet between the tent and my truck. Ponderosa duff crunches. Everybody who has ever walked in dry pine needles knows this. He crossed it silent. He was holding an axe. It was a small camping axe, not a felling axe, the kind you use to split kindling and to knock tent stakes in when you did not bring a mallet. The head was maybe 4 inches across. The handle was maybe 18 inches long. It was not a big weapon. Under other circumstances, I would have taken it away from a man his size without much effort. I had 30 pounds on him, and I had the reach of somebody who has spent 20 years lifting steel plate over his head. But he was between me and my truck, and the children were behind me, and I did not know where his wife was. He said, "The Halvecks eat supper alone." I said, "I am walking your children out of here. You can come with me, or you can stay. That is on you." He said, "The Halvecks eat supper alone." I said, "Do you understand me?" He said, "The Halvecks eat supper alone." I took the tire iron off my belt. I had not remembered clipping it to my belt. I had grabbed it from under the seat when I got out of the truck, unconsciously, on autopilot, the way you grab your keys off the counter when you leave the house. I had the tire iron in my right hand, and the girl's shoulder in my left, and I was standing there in the pine needles at 4:30 p.m., staring at a man with an axe. And I could hear the boy crying, and I could hear the girl saying, quiet as a metronome, "The Halveks are having supper, the Halveks are having supper, the Halveks are having supper." The dog barked again from behind the truck. I looked past the man, past my truck, into the trees on the far side of the road, and I saw the woman. She had put her dress back on. She was standing about 50 feet up the slope, holding something at her side that I could not identify from that distance. It was long and thin. It might have been a rifle. It might have been a stick. She was not looking at me. She was looking at her husband, who was looking at me. She was waiting. I let go of the girl's shoulder. I said to the man, "Quiet. Move." He did not move. I said, "I am not going to hurt these kids. I am walking to my truck. You are going to step aside." He did not move. He did not raise the axe. He held it at his side, casual, like a man holding a hammer he had just finished using. His face did not change. His shoulders did not set. Nothing about him said he was about to do anything. That was the worst part. If he had gotten set to swing, I could have moved. If he had grinned, if he had snarled, if he had said one thing that sounded human, I could have moved. But he stood there and he did not, and I felt something in me go loose. I stepped forward. He did not step aside. I stepped forward again. I was maybe 6 feet from him now. I could smell him. Nothing distinctive, just a man smell. Sweat, hair oil, some detergent smell off his shirt. Not what you would expect from a monster. That was almost the worst part. He smelled like a man. I said, "Last chance." He said, "The Halveks eat supper alone." I swung the tire iron. I aimed for his forearm, the arm holding the axe. I did not aim for his head. I have thought about that a lot in the 2 years since, and I keep coming back to the fact that I did not aim for his head. Some part of me, even then, would not let me hit a man in the head with a tire iron, so I aimed for the forearm. He caught it. He caught the tire iron with his free hand. He caught it in the air about a foot from his forearm, and he stopped it dead, and he held it. He did not react. There was no wince, no grimace, no acknowledgement that he was in a fight. He held the tire iron in his left hand and the axe in his right hand, and he stood there and he looked at me and he said, "The Halveks do not require assistance." I let go of the tire iron. I do not know if that was smart or dumb. I let go of it, and I turned and I picked up the girl, and I did it fast. One arm under her knees and one arm behind her back, and she weighed nothing. She weighed less than my Colton, and my Colton was 3 years younger than her, and I ran for the truck. The boy stayed at the table. I could not carry both of them. God forgive me, I could not carry both of them. I told myself I would come back for the boy. I told myself I would put the girl in the truck and I would come back. I did not come back. That is the first true thing about me from that day. I did not come back for the boy. I need that on the record. I ran with the girl to the truck. The man did not chase me. He stood there with the tire iron in one hand and the axe in the other, and he watched me. His wife, up on the slope, did not move either. She still held the long, thin thing at her side. I got the girl into the passenger side, buckled the belt across her, and I could feel that she was not resisting me, but she was not helping me either. She let her arms hang. She let her head loll. She was breathing. She was not blinking. She was saying, quiet as a metronome, "The Halveks are having supper. The Halveks are having supper." I ran around to the driver's side. The man was gone from where he had been standing. When I turned around, he was at the picnic table, and he had picked up the boy, and he had the boy tucked under one arm like a rolled-up rug, and the axe was in his other hand, and he was walking back toward the tent. I called out, "Hey." He did not turn around. I called out, "Bring him here. Bring me the boy." He did not turn around. He carried the boy into the tent. I remember standing there at the driver's side door of my truck, with the door open, and the girl in the passenger seat still saying, "The Halveks are having supper," and I remember thinking, if I go back for the boy, the axe is in there. The axe is in there with the boy. The wife is up on the slope with the long, thin thing. The dog is somewhere. If I go in there, I do not come out. If I do not go in there, the boy does not come out. I stood at the door of my truck for what felt like a long time. It was probably 4 seconds. It was probably 5. Then the man came back out of the tent without the boy. He was still holding the axe. He started walking toward me. I got in the truck. I slammed the door. I turned the ignition. I put it in reverse, and I went. And I went fast. And I mean fast enough that I heard something break underneath, some part of the exhaust or the transmission mount, and I did not care. I kept going. I got out to the road, and I put it in drive, and I hit the switchback going 40, and I felt the rear end come loose in the gravel, and I let it slide. I did not correct it. I let the truck slide sideways, and I pulled it back at the last second, and then I was on the graded part, and I was gone. I was gone. The girl said, "The Halvecks are having supper." She said it every 3rd second. She said it the whole way down. She said it while I got to the pavement and turned left toward town. And she said it while I got service on my phone. And she said it while I dialed 911. And she said it while I told the dispatcher in a voice that did not sound like mine that there was a family up on BLACKROCK Bald that had a child, and I could not get the child. And the dispatcher said, "Sir, slow down." And I said I could not get the child. And the dispatcher said, "Sir, I need you to slow down." And the girl next to me said, "The Halvecks are having supper." And I said into the phone, "Ma'am, there is a girl in my truck." She said, "Sir, ma'am, is the child hurt?" I said, "No, she is not hurt. She is just." I did not have a word. I said, "She is just very calm." The dispatcher was good. She was very good. She kept me on the line, and she got me to pull over at a Union 76 on the outskirts of Primeville, and she stayed with me while a deputy came, and the deputy was there in about 11 minutes. And the deputy was very calm about the whole thing, and he sat in the passenger seat next to the girl, and he talked to her. And the girl looked at him and said, "The Halvecks are having supper." And the deputy looked at me and said, "Sir, has this child been given anything?" I said, "I do not know." I told him about the jar of dark something. I told him about the boy in the tent. I told him about the axe. I told him about the woman on the slope. He got on his radio. He said things I could not follow. He asked me if I could drive out with him, if I could show him the site. I said yes. We drove up 2 deputy cars, him with the girl, me behind, another deputy behind me. We got to the switchback. We got to the campsite. There was no truck. There was no tent. There was no picnic table. There was no folding chair, no blue tarp, no folding aluminum table, no white plastic plates. There was no dog. There was the fire ring my father had built. There was the log I had sat on. There was my own canvas tent still up. There was the mallet where I had dropped it. There was, when we walked closer, one thing that had not been there when I had left. There was a jar of dark something on the log. It had not been broken. It had not been kicked over. It had been set carefully, right where I had been sitting that morning. The lid was screwed on tight. Inside was what looked like molasses, and when the deputy took it as evidence and shook it, something inside floated up and pressed against the glass for a second. It was small. It was pale. I could not tell you what it was. The deputy did not know either. He put the jar in a paper bag, and he put the paper bag in his cruiser, and he told me to sit down. I sat down on the log. I do not know if I cried at that point or not. I do not know how long I sat there. When I finally looked up, one of the other deputies was standing at the edge of the trees, about 40 yards off, in the place where I had seen the woman that first morning. He was looking down at the ground. When I got up and walked over, he had his radio to his mouth, and he was talking very quiet, and when I got close enough to see what he was looking at, he held up a hand for me to stop. There were prints in the dust, bare footprints. A woman's, not deep. She had not been carrying anything. They were walking away from the campsite. They stopped about 12 feet in at the base of a ponderosa. They did not resume. I do not know how to describe what I mean by that. I mean, the prints were there, going away from the camp into the trees at a normal walking pace. And then, at the base of the ponderosa, they stopped, not turned, not doubled back, stopped, as if she had walked up to the tree and then not walked away from it, as if she had ceased. The deputy stood there for a long time before he waved me back to the log. They took the girl to the hospital in Prineville. They put her under observation. They ran blood work. They found trace amounts of something in her system that the toxicology report described in the language of toxicology reports as an unidentified alkaloid compound, most closely resembling a plant-based sedative not commercially available in the United States. That was as much as they told me. That was as much as they told the girl's aunt, who came for her 3 days later from a town in Idaho whose name I will not repeat. The girl's name was Mavis. She was 10. Her mother, whose name was Ruth, had left her husband, whose name was Delton, 2 years before. Delton had gone into the woods after that and had not come back out. Ruth had raised Mavis alone in a trailer on land that had belonged to Delton's family. The aunt had not seen either of them in 18 months. The aunt said that Ruth had been, quote, always odd, unquote. The aunt said that Mavis had been, quote, a good girl before, unquote. When I asked the aunt what she meant by before, the aunt looked at me and did not answer. There had been a boy. His name had been Jonah. He was 7. He was Ruth's son by Delton. He was gone. There had also been, per the aunt, a 4th. There had been another child, a younger one, a boy. The aunt did not know the name. The aunt said Ruth had had another one after Delton had gone into the woods. She said it in a way that implied that Delton was not the father. She said it in a way that implied she did not want to talk about who the father was. I asked, "Is this child alive?" The aunt looked at me. She did not answer. The deputies searched BLACKROCK for a week. They brought in dogs. They brought in a helicopter from LeGrand. They walked grids down every draw within 3 miles of the Bald. They found nothing. No truck. No tent. No bodies. No boy. They did not find Ruth. They did not find the axe. They did not find the man who called himself the Halvex. They did find one thing. About a mile off the Bald, in the direction of the Seasonal Creek, there was a downed cedar with a hollow at its base. Inside the hollow was a wool blanket, folded, and a set of small clothes folded on top, a white button-up, a black clip-on tie, a pair of dress shoes. Size, I do not remember. Boys, size. The deputy who found the hollow told me it looked like the clothes had been laid there recent days, not weeks. The blanket smelled like wood smoke and something else he could not name, and he had been a search and rescue guy for 18 years. That was Jonah's outfit. That was what he had been wearing at the table. They did not find Jonah in the hollow. They did not find Jonah anywhere. What they found was the clothes. That was 2 years ago. I stayed in the county for a week after. I had to. The sheriff put me up at a motor court on the edge of Prineville, one of those places from the 60s with the numbered doors painted the same brown as the trim, and every morning a different deputy would come and pick me up and drive me back out to BLACKROCK and walk me through the same questions. Where did the truck park? Where did the woman stand? Where did the man come from? I answered them the same way every time. The deputies were patient with me. They did not push. They understood, I think, that I was answering the questions to myself as much as to them, and that if they let me keep answering them, some part of the answers might change enough to matter. They did not change. I told them the same thing every day. On the 4th day, the older deputy, the one who had ridden in the passenger seat with the girl, drove me out at 4 a.m. It was not on the schedule. He knocked on my motor court door and he said, "Put your boots on." I put my boots on. We drove up in the dark. We did not talk. When we got to the switchback, he killed the headlights, and we crawled the last half mile in second gear on parking lights only. It was not necessary. Nobody was up there. but I understood why he did it. He wanted to see the campsite the way it had looked when the truck had first appeared, at that same hour of morning, when a man in his long johns had woken up to a leaking cooler and had gone outside to piss. We got out of the cruiser and we stood there in the gray light, and he did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "Did she watch you the whole time?" I said, "Yes." He said, "From behind that tree?" I said, "Yes." He walked over to the tree. He was in his 60s, and he moved careful. He crouched down at the base of the ponderosa. He was there a long time. When he came back, he had something small in his palm. He held it out for me to look at. It was a piece of a fingernail, manicured, painted a color I could not quite make out in the light. Blue, maybe. He did not touch it. He held it in his palm and he looked at it, and then he closed his palm and he put it in a paper envelope from his shirt pocket. He said, "She was there when you woke up." I said, "Yes." He said, "Was she there when you went to bed the night before?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "That is what I thought." We drove back down. We did not talk. When he dropped me at the motor court, he sat there with the engine idling, and he looked out the windshield for a while, and then he said, "Ray, I am going to tell you something. I have been on this job 41 years, and I do not know what happened up there. I want you to hear that from me. I do not know. If somebody comes to you in the next 5 years and tells you they know what happened up there, you tell them I said they do not know either." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You go home. You take care of your boys. You do not come back here. This place is not for you anymore." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "You did what you could. You got the girl out. You could not have got the boy. Do you hear me?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Do you hear me, Ray?" I said, "Yes, sir." He was crying, I think. Just a little. I could not see for sure because he was looking at the windshield and not at me. His voice did not change. But when he took his hand off the wheel to shift into drive, his hand was shaking. Not much, just a little. He said, "Get out of the car, son. Go inside. Sleep if you can." I got out. I went inside. I did not sleep. I have not been back to BLACKROCK. I will not go back to BLACKROCK. I could not tell you now. If you drove me to the beginning of Forest Road 22 and pointed the truck up the switchback, whether I could get out of the passenger seat. I did not go back to work for a while after that. I sat in my house alone and I did not answer the phone. Erin came back from Bend after about a month. She had heard about it. She had heard from her sister, who had heard from a friend at the sheriff's office, and she came home to the house without calling first, and she let herself in with her key, and she sat on the couch across from me, and she did not say anything for a long time. Then she said, "Ray." I looked at her. She said, "You okay?" I said, "No." She said, "Okay." She stayed the night. She did not sleep in our bed. She slept on the couch. In the morning she was gone, and there was a note on the counter that said she would come by on Saturday and to please eat something. She came by on Saturday. She came by every Saturday for 2 months. Around the 3rd month she started staying. Around the 4th month she moved back in. We are okay now. Not the way we used to be okay. Different. Quieter. There is a thing between us that was not there before. It is not bad. It is not good either. It is just there, and it belongs to both of us. The boys came home. Colton is 11 now. Henry is 8. They do not know what happened. They know something happened. They know their dad went camping and something bad happened at camping and their dad does not camp anymore. That is what they know. When Colton asks about it, which he still does sometimes, I tell him it was a long story and I would tell him when he was older. Colton is a smart boy. He knows what that means. He does not push. The aunt in Idaho took Mavis. Mavis is 12 now. I have not seen her since the hospital. But the aunt sent me a Christmas card the first year and a Christmas card the second year, and inside the second one there was a drawing Mavis had made in colored pencil. There was a house with a tree next to it. The tree was blue. The house was blue. The sky was blue. There were 4 windows in the house. 3 of them had faces in them. The 4th was empty. On the back of the drawing, in the child's handwriting, it said, "Thank you for my life." I keep the drawing in a drawer in my desk. I look at it sometimes, not often, but sometimes. The jar of dark something never got identified. The toxicology lab in Portland said it was mostly molasses. The something in the molasses, they said, was cartilage, human cartilage. That was as much as they could tell me. Human cartilage from what part of a body, they could not say. Whose cartilage, they could not say. They said the sample was too small. The case is still open. I do not know that it will ever close. Every couple of months, I get a call from a deputy who has taken it over from the deputy before. They ask if I have remembered anything new. I tell them I have not. They tell me they will keep me posted. I tell them I appreciate it. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and Aaron is asleep beside me and the boys are asleep down the hall, I put my hand on my chest and I feel my own heartbeat and I think, the Halvecs are here. I do not say it out loud. I do not need to. I just lie there and I feel it. I do not sleep much anymore. Erin has noticed. She has stopped asking. Some nights I get up around 3 a.m. and I go downstairs and I sit at the kitchen table and I put my hands flat on the wood and I look at my hands, which are the hands of a welder, which are the hands of a man who has built a stair stringer and a fire ring in a house that his kids live in. I look at my hands and I think about the girl at the picnic table, folded in her lap, and the boy at the picnic table folded in his lap. And I think about the man in the fire ring who I did not swing at with my tire iron the second time, and I think about the woman on the slope with the long, thin thing at her side. I go outside then, most nights. I stand on the back porch. It is a small porch. Erin has a wind chime hanging on the eave that Colton made her for Mother's Day one year, out of a coffee can and some spoons, and when there is any breeze at all, it makes a small clanking noise. I stand there and I listen to the clanking noise, and I look at the yard and I look at the fence, and I look at the woods behind the fence, because there are woods behind our fence, and the woods are not close, and they are not far, and they are the way woods have been my whole life. They have not changed. The woods have not changed. I have, and every once in a while out there, standing on my porch at 3 a.m. with the coffee can wind chime clanking soft above my head, I will look at the tree line at the back of my yard, and I will see, for just a second, something pale between the trunks. It might be a birch. It might be nothing. It might be my eyes doing what eyes do at 3 a.m. in the yard of a man who is not sleeping well. It might be a woman in a blue dress. I do not go check. I do not walk out into the yard. I do not turn on the porch light. I just stand there and I look, and after a while I go inside and I lock the door and I go back upstairs and I lie down next to my wife and I put my hand on her shoulder and I close my eyes and I wait for morning. The Halvecs are having supper. The first tree I found was a hemlock about a quarter mile past the Bouquet River crossing. There were 4 holes in it at chest height in a row, so evenly spaced that for a full 10 seconds I stood there and told myself it was a woodpecker. A pileated woodpecker will drum in a line like that. I knew this because Ben had told me once, in the summer we were both still in high school, when we had walked in through the same crossing on a hike I could not fully remember anymore because I had spent the last 2 years trying not to remember it. Ben was my brother. Ben was 2 years younger than me. Ben had died in the spring of 2023 on a Sunday afternoon in the parking lot of an Arby's off the Northway, of an overdose that the coroner had called accidental and my mother had called Ben's decision. My mother was still not talking to me in any way that mattered. My father was still not doing much of anything since. I had been laid off from the insurance office at the beginning of that May, and my landlord had raised the rent on my studio in Glens Falls, and I had been sitting in that studio for 3 weeks looking at the ceiling and eating store-brand cornflakes out of a mug. I could not clean well anymore, and I had decided one morning that if I did not go somewhere, I was going to die too. So I went to Ben's spot. Ben's spot was a stretch of unmarked backcountry east of the Dix Range, off a spur trail that Ben and our uncle had bushwhacked together the year Ben was 14. There was no map to it. There was no cairn at the turnoff. There was only the Bouquet Crossing and then a game trail that ran north for about 8 miles through a mixed hemlock stand, and if you followed the game trail until you hit an outcrop of quartz on your right-hand side, you cut left at the outcrop and dropped down into a little bowl that Ben had called the chapel. The chapel had a cold spring at its base, and a stand of old-growth birch around the spring. Ben had gone there twice a year, spring and fall, every year, from the time he was 14 to the time he was 27. That was 13 years, which I did not remember counting until I was standing at the Bouquet Crossing with my pack on my back and my dead brother's compass in my chest pocket. I was 2 days into the walk when I found the first hemlock. It was late in the day. The light was already going that particular Adirondack yellow that means you had better be thinking about camp. I had been thinking about camp for the last hour, and I had been looking for the flat spot where I had planned to set up, the one Ben and I had used the summer I graduated, and I had walked past the tree twice before I registered that I had walked past it. That happens to you in the woods when you are tired. You start to file things away as normal without really looking at them. It was on the third pass, when I had circled back because I could not find the flat spot and had begun to worry I had missed it, that I stopped in front of the hemlock and I looked at it. 4 holes in a row. Each hole was about the diameter of a dime. Each hole was clean. There was no splintering around the edges, the way there is with a woodpecker. The bark was drilled through, and the wood behind the bark was drilled through, and the holes were dark inside, and the tree was leaking sap from 3 of them. The 4th hole had a piece of something jammed into it. I looked closer. It was a piece of aluminum tubing, about 3 inches long, the kind you would find at a hardware store in a package labeled for aquarium use. It had been driven into the tree flush with the bark, and it was leaking sap out its own tiny mouth in a slow amber bead that dripped into the pine needles at the base of the tree. I stood there and I looked at it, and I said, out loud, "What in the goddamn?" Ben would have laughed. Ben used to make fun of me for talking to trees. I have never been a hiker, not really. I have been a person who hikes because his brother hiked. I do not know one bird from another, and I do not know the names of any of the wild flowers, and I could not tell you a hemlock from a spruce, unless somebody told me which was which. And even then I would forget by the next morning. I knew this was a hemlock because Ben had told me on this same trail so many times over the years that the word had finally stuck. Hemlock. Straight up like a broom handle. Little flat needles. The kind you crush between your fingers and they smell green. I did not crush any needles. I looked at the aluminum tube. Somebody had drilled a tree with a hand drill, and then they had driven a piece of aquarium tubing into one of the holes. I could think of one reason to do that. It was for tapping. My uncle had a maple sugar operation in Vermont, and I had helped him tap trees since I was old enough to swing a maul, and this looked functionally like a maple tap. You do not tap a hemlock. I mean, you can. I looked it up later. There is a niche cottage industry of people who make tea from hemlock tips, and there is a tinier niche who tap hemlocks for a kind of thin resin that is used as an incense. But it is not something anybody does at any scale. It is not something you do 8 miles up an unmarked spur trail with a hand crank drill in October. You do not need 8 miles of privacy to tap a hemlock for tea. I stood there and I thought about it, and the light kept going yellow. I decided to keep walking. I had wanted to camp on the flat spot near the crossing, but the crossing was behind me now, and it was another hour back, and I was tired, and I did not want to backtrack. I was carrying too much weight. That was on me. I had packed for a week when I could have packed for 4 days, because I had not wanted to have to come home before I had to. I had cans of soup I did not need. I had a spare wool sweater. I had 2 paperbacks and Ben's compass and a set of his handkerchiefs that my mother had given me because she could not look at them anymore. And I had a little tin box with some of Ben's ashes in it that I had spooned out of the urn without telling anybody before the urn had gone to be buried. And I had brought his ashes here because Ben had wanted to be here more than anywhere else in the world. and my mother had refused to consider a scattering at the chapel because my mother refused to consider anything about Ben's life that came after his 18th birthday. I walked on. I found the second hemlock about 200 yards further up the trail. Same 4 holes, same aluminum tube in one of them, same slow amber bead. The tree was maybe 15 feet from the game trail. If I had been walking with my head down, watching my feet, which I had been, I would have walked right past it. I had walked right past the first one twice. I stood in front of the second hemlock, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck do a thing it had not done since the last time I had walked into Ben's studio apartment and seen the pile of unopened mail on the kitchen table. I said, out loud, "Who is doing this?" Nobody answered, not out loud. The forest kept doing what forest does when you talk to it, which is to say it kept ignoring you politely. I walked on. Third hemlock. Another 100 yards. Fourth. Another 80. By the time I found the fifth, I had stopped counting. They came at irregular intervals, 3 of them in the space of 100 feet, then nothing for a quarter mile, then a little cluster of them around a bend where the game trail dipped through a boggy patch. Every one of them was tapped. Not all of them had the aluminum tubing. Some had wooden dowels driven into them, whittled to a point on one end. Some had nothing in the holes, just the holes themselves, dark and slow with sap. The sap did not smell like hemlock sap should. I mean, I had never smelled hemlock sap before, as far as I knew, but the smell was wrong. It was not the sweet, clean pine smell you would expect. It was a smell like something that had been kept in a jar too long, like the water in a vase after the flowers have died, like the cabinet under the sink where the sponge lives that you never remember to throw out. I noticed the smell only when I stopped, and then I could not stop noticing it. I got to a rise where the trail went up and over a low ridge, and at the top of the ridge I stopped and I turned around and I looked back the way I had come. Behind me, in the failing yellow light, I could see the trunks of maybe 30 hemlocks in a line down along the game trail. Every single one of them had holes. Every single one. I felt something cold move up through the back of my legs and into my belly. I felt my hand go, without asking me, to the sheath knife on my belt. I did not want to think about how many hemlocks in this forest I could not see. I did not want to think about who had drilled the ones I could. I kept walking. There was another set of taps at the top of the ridge itself, in a spruce this time. Not a hemlock. I did not think anybody tapped spruce for anything. The holes were in a triangle, 3 of them, and there was a little wooden peg driven into the topmost one. The peg had been whittled. I could see the knife strokes on it in the low light. Somebody had sat down somewhere, probably not far, and had whittled these pegs and had gone around driving them into trees. It was a lot of work. Whoever was doing this was doing it patient, over years, and the years were showing. I went past the spruce and I did not look back at it. I made camp about a mile past the ridge. It was not the flat spot I had wanted. It was a stretch of duff off the trail near a downed maple where the ground was mostly level and the tree canopy was thick enough that I would not get dew in the tent. There was no water. I would have to backtrack in the morning to fill up. That was fine. I was too tired to care. I set up the tent by headlamp. My hands were shaking a little, and it took me 2 tries to get the poles seated. When I was done, I sat on the maple log and I opened a can of Progresso lentil soup and I ate it cold because I did not want to set up the stove. I put the empty can in a Ziploc and I hung the Ziploc from a branch in a tree away from where I was sleeping, and I brushed my teeth without water and I got into the tent and I lay there in the dark. Ben's ashes were in the tin in the top of my pack. The pack was inside the tent with me. I could feel the shape of the tin through the fabric of the pack, and I could feel the shape of the compass in my chest pocket, and I could feel my own heart beating in my chest, and I could hear the wind moving in the tops of the hemlocks around me, a slow shushing that Ben had loved and that I had never learned to hear the way he had heard it. I thought about my mother. I did not want to, and I did. My mother lived in a house in South Glens Falls that she had bought with my father the year I was born, and I had not been inside that house since the funeral. My mother had not asked me to come inside. My mother had, at the funeral, in the receiving line at the funeral home, looked at me over the top of a paper cup of coffee somebody had put in her hand and had said, in a voice that had not been for me and had not been for anybody, that if she had been paying attention, she would have seen it coming. And if I had been paying attention, I would have seen it coming. And neither of us had been paying attention. That was what she had said. Then she had drunk the coffee and she had walked away. She had not spoken to me at the graveside. She had not spoken to me at the reception. She had, in the 2 years since, sent me a Christmas card each year with only her name on it, and had answered my calls maybe one time in 5, and each of those times had been brief, and had not been forgiveness. I was not sure she had it in her to forgive me. I was not sure I had it in me to be forgiven. I was in the woods with Ben's ashes, because I could not go to her and she could not come to me, and Ben was the only thing between us and the two of us. Had put him in a hole in the ground in Corinth, New York, in April of the year he died, and had not looked at each other while we did it. I was here to change that. I was here to say something to him. I did not know what. Somewhere out in the dark, something dripped. Slow drip. Very slow. Like water off an icicle in a warm room. Slower than any leaking sap I had ever heard from a tree. I lay there and I listened. The drip came every 15 or 20 seconds. It was not regular. It was too far away to place. I told myself it was the tap on the nearest hemlock, that the sap was falling into a puddle at the base of the tree, that I was just close enough to hear it because the woods were otherwise silent. Then I lay there some more, and I told myself that a drip of sap onto pine needles does not make a sound. Sap falls into duff, and duff eats the sap. There is no drip sound. There is only silence. The drip came again. I got my headlamp on and I sat up. I did not go outside. I want that on the record. I did not unzip the tent. I sat inside with the headlamp on and I listened to the dripping. It came, and it came, and it came, at long uneven intervals, from somewhere out in the dark. After about 15 minutes it moved. That is what it did. It moved. The drip stopped coming from one direction and started coming from a slightly different direction. Not much. Maybe 10 degrees. Like the drip source had crossed a few feet of ground and set up in a new spot. I turned off the headlamp. I lay back down. I put my hand on the tin in my pack and I said, in a voice so low it might have been thought, Ben, I do not know what this is, and I would like to go home, and I am sorry, I am sorry, I am sorry. The drip kept up until sometime around dawn. Then it stopped. When it stopped, I finally slept, and I did not have any dreams that I could remember, which was the first night in a long time that I had not dreamed about Ben. The second day was worse. I got up at first light. My eyes were gummy and my mouth tasted like the inside of the empty soup can. I broke camp fast. I did not eat. I filled my water bottle at a trickle I found off the trail from a spring line, and I filtered it with the pump filter I had brought, and I drank half and refilled and moved on. I told myself I was going to find the chapel by early afternoon, and I was going to spread Ben's ashes, and I was going to hike out before dark. I told myself I had 10 hours of daylight and 8 miles to go, and that I did not have to stop for anything. I did not have to look at any more trees. I had come here to do a thing, and I was going to do the thing, and I was going to leave. I did not want to admit, even to myself, that I was scared. I found the buck about half an hour after breaking camp. It was in a clearing off to the left of the game trail, about 40 feet in. I would have walked past it if I had not turned my head to check a movement in my peripheral vision. There was no movement. The buck was dead. Or the buck was almost dead. It was lying on its side in a patch of ferns, and its head was up and its eyes were open, and it was breathing shallow, slow breaths. Its rack was a small 4-point. It was young. It was not the kind of thing you would go after with a rifle, even in season, which this was not. I stepped off the trail. I know now that I should not have. I do not know what I thought I was going to do for it. I do not carry a rifle. I do not carry anything you could put a deer down with humanely. I had my sheath knife, and I had a stove, and I had a compass. If I had been a hunter, I would have known what to do. I was not a hunter. I was a laid-off insurance clerk who had walked into the woods with his brother's ashes in a skull tin. I got close. I got low. I did not want to spook it, though it was clearly not going to spook. Its eyes tracked me. That was all. Its eyes tracked me, and its breathing kept up its slow rhythm, and its legs did not move at all. Neither did its head. Its head was on the ground, still upright, but the buck was not raising it. It could not raise it. Something was wrong with the buck below the neck. I could see it now that I was close. I could see the way its front legs lay in a way that was not right. The joints were wrong. The right foreleg was folded under the body in a way that no living deer would ever tolerate. The back legs were the same, folded wrong, like the buck had lain down and then all four legs had gone loose at once. The buck was breathing. Its eyes tracked me. Its legs did not work. There was no wound, no blood, no claw marks, no sign that a coyote or a bear or a fisher had gotten to it. There was nothing on it at all. There was only the buck lying in the ferns with its head up and its eyes on me. At the base of the buck's right ear, in the soft hollow where a fold of hide meets the skull, there was a single dark hole, perfectly round, about the diameter of a dime. I looked at it for a long time. I did not turn my head away. I looked at it, and I made myself look, and I felt my throat close up the way it had closed up in the Arby's parking lot when I had gotten the phone call, and I said out loud, "I am so sorry, buddy." The buck kept breathing. I got up. I walked back to the trail. I did not look at the buck again. I could not have put it down if I had wanted to, not without making a mess of it, and there was some part of me that could not shake the feeling that whoever had put that hole in it was still nearby, and that whoever had put that hole in it might come back to check on it, and that the sound of any effort I made to end it would carry. I walked fast. I stopped looking at hemlocks. I kept my eyes on the ground 3 feet in front of me, and I walked, and the smell of the taps followed me up the trail, and the sound of the drip, though I told myself the drip was in my head now and not in the woods, seemed to travel with me. Every time I stopped, the drip stopped a beat later. I do not know if that was true, or if I only thought it was true. I could not tell the difference anymore. About an hour past the buck, I came to a spot where somebody had built a small structure off to the left of the trail. Not a tent, not a hunting blind. It was made of hemlock branches, cut and laid together into a kind of low frame, about the size of a doghouse. The branches had been lashed with what looked like strips of bark. There was no roof. There was no floor. It was just a low frame of green wood tied together in the shape of a little house with no walls. I stopped and I looked at it from the trail. I did not go closer. Inside the frame, on the pine needles, there were 3 small clay dishes, old dishes, chipped, filled with sap. 2 of the dishes had ants in the sap, and the ants were dead. The 3rd dish was clean and full, and the sap had a thin skin on top like pudding that has sat out. I stood at the edge of the trail, and I looked at the little frame, and I thought, this is somebody's shrine. This is the place where somebody has been coming to leave something for something. And I felt, again, that cold thing move up through the back of my legs into my belly, only this time it kept going, and it went up into my chest, and I felt it settle behind my breastbone the way a coal settles in a stove. I did not want to walk on. I did not want to walk back either. I did not have a choice. The chapel was ahead of me. I had come to spread Ben's ashes at the chapel. I had not driven for 2 hours, and walked for a day and a half to turn around a mile from the outcrop because somebody had made a doghouse out of hemlock branches. That is what I told myself. That is what I made myself believe. I walked past the frame. I did not touch the dishes. I did not look inside again after the first time. But I know now, and I knew then, that there were more of these frames off the trail all through the last mile. I had missed them on my way in because I had been looking for landmarks. Now that I knew what to look for, I could pick them out in the peripheral corners of my vision, small dark shapes of stacked branches at the edges of little clearings, back among the ferns, wherever the ground fell away from the trail. I did not count them. I could not have counted them if I had tried. There were more than I could stand to see. I passed the quartz outcrop around noon. It was smaller than I remembered. That is the thing about places you go with somebody you have lost. You remember them bigger. The quartz outcrop was maybe 6 feet tall, a slab of white stone tilted at an angle out of the moss, and Ben had climbed it every time we had passed it. Ben had been a climber. Ben had gone up the outcrop with his hands in his pockets, showing off, and I had told him he was going to fall and split his skull, and Ben had said, "One day, older brother, but not today." That was a line Ben had used a lot. He had used it every time I had said anything that could have been taken as a warning. "One day, older brother, but not today." I stood at the base of the outcrop, and I laid my hand on the quartz, and I felt the cold of it, and I said Ben's name once quiet, and then I turned left and I dropped down the slope into the chapel. The chapel had not changed. The chapel could not have changed. It was rock and old trees and a spring that came up out of a fissure in the granite floor of a shallow bowl. It was maybe 40 feet across at the widest point. It was ringed by birches so old that their bark had gone black and split, and their trunks leaned outward from the spring like a crown of great teeth around a mouth. The mouth was spring, and the spring came up cold and clean and made a little pool at the center of the chapel that was maybe 3 feet across and no deeper than my ankle. The pool drained out one edge in a rivulet that ran off down the slope and became, eventually, one of the tributaries of the Bouquet. Ben had told me all of this, and I had not fully believed him, and I had, in the last 2 years, gone to the Adirondack Museum in Blue Mountain Lake and looked at a hydrological survey and seen the chapel spring marked with a small blue dot on a map, unnamed, unlisted. Ben had known things about this place. Ben had been the kind of person who paid attention. I had not been. I stood at the edge of the chapel, and I looked down at the pool, and I felt something in my chest let go. I had thought, walking in, that finding evidence of the tapping man near the chapel would ruin it, that there would be frames of branches around the pool, that there would be dishes of sap, that there would be aluminum tubing driven into every birch. I had thought this without letting myself think it. If the chapel was tapped, if the chapel had been touched by him, then Ben's place was not Ben's place anymore, and I was going to have to find somewhere else to put my brother down. And I did not know if I could stand that. The chapel was clean. That is the truth of it. The chapel was clean. The birches were untouched. The moss around the pool was clean and green and thick and had no boot prints in it. There was no smell. There was no dish. There was no frame. Whatever the tapping man was doing on the trail, he had not done it at the chapel. The chapel had been left alone. I understood, in that moment, that this was on purpose. I understood that the chapel was his too. That was why he had not touched it. He knew about it. He was there. But he had left it as it was, because he was saving it, or because he had a use for it that had nothing to do with dishes and tubes, or because it was the one place in his forest that he did not disturb. I did not understand which of these was true, and I still do not. I understood only that the chapel was clean because he had wanted it clean. I got out of the pack. I sat on a fallen birch. I ate a granola bar. I drank from my bottle. I unscrewed the lid of the skull tin, and I looked at Ben's ashes, which were less a gray than I had expected, more of a light tan, more like coarse sand than powder. I do not know what I had expected. I sat there and I looked at the tin, and I did not cry yet. I said, out loud, "I am here, Benny." I said, "I made it." Then, from the far side of the chapel, behind the ring of birches, something coughed. Not a person coughing, not that. A larger sound, a wet, thick sound, like a cough that had been going on for a while and had gotten deep down into a chest. It came from behind the birches on the far side, about 30 feet from where I was sitting. It was not close. It was not far. I put the lid back on the skull tin. I put the tin in my pack. I did not move. Neither did whatever had coughed. For maybe 30 seconds, nothing happened at all. Then, slow, from behind the tree, A head came out. The head was a man's head. It came around the trunk of one of the black birches on the far side of the pool, about 8 feet off the ground. The birch was maybe 20 feet tall. Its trunk, at the point where the head came out, was maybe 18 inches across, which means whoever was standing behind that birch was standing on something, or was on his knees on top of something at a height that put his eyes 8 feet above the moss, or he was tall enough that the birch could not hide him. I did not look at him. I mean, I did, but I looked at him in the way. You look at a bear, you have surprised in a berry patch. Not full eye contact, not enough to be a challenge, just enough to place him in space. I saw a head, I saw hair, I saw a piece of a face that was pale under a beard so long and matted that it was hard to tell where the beard stopped and the throat began. I saw one eye. The eye did not blink. It looked at me and it did not blink for the entire time I was looking sideways at it, which felt like a very long time. Then the head, slow, went back behind the birch. I stood up. I did not stand up fast. I did not say anything. I put my pack on. I did not fasten the sternum strap because the click of the buckle would have made noise. I got the pack on and I walked, slow and steady, around the chapel to the trail I had come in on, and I started up the slope back toward the quartz outcrop. Behind me, from the far side of the chapel, I heard him step out from behind the birch. I did not turn around. I heard his boot come down on the moss. It was a heavy sound. It was not a stealthy sound. It was a sound like a man walking, who did not care if he was heard, because whoever heard him did not have anywhere to go. I got to the outcrop. I did not climb it. I walked around it. I got on the game trail heading back the way I had come, and I started walking fast, not running, because I did not trust my footing on that trail at anything faster than a fast walk, and because if I ran and I turned an ankle, I was going to be lying in the ferns, like the buck. He was walking, not running. He was walking through the chapel, toward the trail I had come in on. I could hear his feet on the moss, and I could hear a wet, dragging sound that I could not place at first, and then, when I placed it, wished I had not. He was dragging something, not something big, something the size of a coat or a bedroll. The wet, dragging sound was the sound of that something dragging over the moss. I did not look back. I want that on the record. I did not look back, and I do not know what he was dragging. I know only that when I got to the outcrop and started up the game trail, I could still hear the dragging behind me, and I could still hear his boots, and I could hear something else I had not heard at the chapel, which was that he was humming. He was humming. It was a small, quiet, back-of-the-throat humming, the kind an old man does when he is happy about a job of work. It was tuneless. It was almost tuneful. It was the humming of a person who had been alone a very long time and had stopped noticing when he made the sound. Behind me, I heard him laugh. That was the worst sound in this whole story, and I have to tell it right or I will not tell it at all. It was a laugh, and it was the laugh of a man, and it was a laugh in the way that when a person laughs at something they think is funny, you can hear it in their voice. It had that shape, that upward run of pleasure. That was what made it worse. It was not a growl. It was not a roar. It was not the sound you make when you are hunting somebody and you want them to know it. It was a sound you make when you are watching a good bit on the television with your feet up. It was a friendly laugh. It was warm. It had a rasp at the back of it, the same wet rasp as the cough. But there was pleasure in the front of the sound, and it was so wrong to hear that laugh in the woods behind me, from a man who had been standing 8 feet off the ground behind a birch tree, that I felt my knees go loose under me for a second, and I put a hand on a tree to keep from going down. I kept walking. He laughed again, further off now, then again, further still. He was not chasing me. That was what I understood then, and I still understand now, though I did not want to believe it in the moment. He was not chasing me. He was letting me go. He was watching me go, and he was laughing to himself about it, and he was letting me go, and he was doing this because he could catch me anytime he wanted, and he wanted me to know it. He wanted me to walk out of his woods and know that he had let me. He wanted the walking out itself to be the lesson. I walked out. Most of the walk out was me walking. 3 things about it stayed with me, and the rest did not. The first thing is that I saw more hemlocks with holes drilled in them on trees I had not noticed on the way in, and on trees I had already passed. When I got back to the ridge, where I had turned around and looked at the line of tapped trunks the day before, I noticed that half a dozen of the trees along that line had fresh sap running that had not been running when I had walked up, fresh amber beads on trees that had been dry an hour before. The taps had been checked. He had walked that trail behind me, and he had checked the taps. He had known I was coming out the same way I had gone in. The second thing is that I heard the drip again, once, at dusk. I was still an hour from where I had planned to make my second night's camp, though I was not going to make camp there or anywhere else. I was going to walk out. I was going to walk out through the dark if I had to. But the light was going and the trail was getting hard to see, and I stopped for 1 minute to eat a granola bar and drink some water, and while I was stopped I heard, from somewhere off to my right, that same slow drip, every 20 seconds or so, slow and uneven, not close, not far. I did not turn my head. I did not look. I finished the granola bar, and I put the water bottle back in my hip pocket, and I walked. The third thing is that I made it back to the Bouquet Crossing about 2 a.m. My headlamp had died an hour before. I had been walking by moonlight and by the memory of my feet. I had fallen twice. The second time I had gone down into a patch of blowdowns, and I had cut my palm on a broken branch, and I had not felt the cut until I saw the blood on the strap of my pack. When I got to the crossing, I sat down on a rock at the edge of the water, and I put my hand in the cold river, and I let it sting. I sat there for a long time. I was crying by then. I had started crying somewhere on the walk out, and I did not know when. My face was wet and my nose was running, and I did not care. I sat at the crossing, and I cried for my brother. I want to be careful how I say this. I did not cry for the tapping man. I did not cry for what I had seen, or for the buck, or for the drilled hemlocks. I cried for Ben. It was the first time I had cried for Ben in the 2 years since he had died. That is the truth. I had not been able to. I had sat in his apartment cleaning it out with my father, and I had not cried. I had sat at his funeral, and I had not cried. I had gone through the summer and the fall and the winter and the next spring and the next summer, and I had not cried. I had been dry inside all the way down, and I do not know why the crossing was the place. I do not know why the tapping man was the door. I do not know if the two things had anything to do with each other, or if I had just finally walked far enough and gotten scared enough that whatever was holding me together loosened up and let it go. I cried. I cried for a long time. I sat with my bleeding hand in the cold river, and I said, out loud, "Benny, I do not think I got to give you what I brought." I had not spread the ashes. The skull tin was still in my pack, unopened. I had not scattered them at the chapel. I had not said any words. I had run. I had left Ben in my pack, and I had run, and Ben was still in my pack now, at 2 a.m. at the crossing. I opened the pack. I got out the tin. In my head, I had walked out to the middle of the crossing, and I had spread his ashes into the current. In my head, I had said something for him. I did not. I sat at the edge of the crossing, and I held the tin in my 2 hands, and I could not open it. I could not do it. I could not put Ben into the river at 2 a.m. at a crossing, alone, with my hand bleeding and my headlamp dead and a man in the woods behind me who might or might not still be watching. I could not do that to Ben. I could not do it as a hurry-up thing. I had come here to do it right. I had failed to do it right. I did not know when I would get another chance. I did not know if I would ever have the guts to walk that trail again. I sat there with the tin in my 2 hands for a long time. Then I put the tin back in the pack. I put the pack back on my back. I stood up. I said, "I am sorry, Ben. I will come back." I did not know then that I was lying. I did not know I was never going to come back. I walked the last 3 miles to my car by moonlight, and I drove out of the trailhead lot at 4 a.m., and I did not stop until I was in Elizabethtown at a Stewart's that opened at 5, and I sat in the parking lot until they turned the lights on, and I went inside and I bought a cup of coffee and a bag of donut holes, and the woman at the register asked me if I was all right, and I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am all right." And she looked at my hand, which was still bleeding a little, into the wadded tissue I had wrapped around it, and she said, "Sir, that hand is not all right." And I looked at my hand and I said, "Oh, would you happen to have a Band-Aid?" She had a Band-Aid. She gave me 2. She was kind. I did not thank her enough. I did not report anything. That was the first thing I decided when I got home. I got home. I ate a sandwich. I slept for 14 hours. I woke up and I ate a can of cold soup, and I slept for another 8. When I finally got up for real on the 3rd day, I stood in my studio kitchen and I looked at Ben's compass on the counter, and I thought about calling the Ranger District office at Raybrook and telling them there was a man in the woods east of the Dix Range who had done something to a deer and was drilling hemlocks and had scared a hiker off a trail. I thought about it for a long time. Then I did not do it. I did not do it because I could not think of what to say that would not sound like a person having a breakdown. I did not do it because I did not know exactly where I had been. I did not do it because part of me was afraid that if I said his name out loud to a stranger, and I do not know why I was thinking of him as having a name, some part of me was afraid that he would know I had said it, and that he would come looking for who I had said it to. That last one is what stopped me. I have thought about it a lot since. It is not a rational thing. He did not know my name. He did not know where I lived. He did not know that I had a phone or that I would ever be near one again. There was no way that speaking about him could carry back to him. And yet, the whole time I sat on my kitchen floor with my phone in my hand and the Ranger's number on the screen, I could feel, in a way I cannot fully describe, that he would know if I made the call, and he would remember it, and that it would come due at some later date, in some way I would not see coming. I put the phone down. That was 2 years ago, last October. I did not go back to work at the insurance office. They had let me go with a small severance, and I stretched the severance as long as I could, and then I got a job at a lumber yard in Queensbury doing forklift work, and the lumberyard work suited me. I was outside most of the day. I lifted heavy things. I did not have to talk to anybody except the guys on the loading crew, and they did not want to talk to me either, which was the arrangement I preferred. I still have that job. I have gotten a small raise. My father calls me on Sundays now. He does not talk about Ben, neither do I. But he calls, and he asks how the yard is, and I tell him, and we sit on the phone for about 10 minutes each week, and that is more than I had 6 months ago. I had a dream the second night I was home. I have not told anybody about it. I do not know that I should tell anybody about it. It was this. I was in the chapel. I was standing at the edge of the pool where I had stood. The tapping man was on the far side of the pool, behind the same black birch. He was not hiding this time. He was standing where I could see him. He was as tall as I had feared, and he was pale under his beard, and his eyes were the kind of gray that has not been in a face that has slept indoors in a long time. He was holding something in his hand. It was a hand crank drill, the small kind, with a wooden handle and a brass gear. He was not holding it like a weapon. He was holding it the way a man holds his lunch pail on the way to a shift. He said, in the dream, "You came a long way to leave a brother in a can." I could not answer him. He said, "Give him to me." He held out his hand for the tin. I did not give him the tin. I held it against my chest. I said in the dream, "You are not getting him." He looked at me a long time. Then he said, "Suit yourself, boy." But he does not stay a brother forever. He becomes something else. In a can, he becomes something else. You are not doing him a favor. I woke up. It was 3 a.m. The tin was on the shelf where I had put it. I got out of bed and I stood in the kitchen in my shorts and I stared at the tin. And after a while I got a glass of water. and I got back into bed, and I did not sleep the rest of the night. I did not open the tin the next day. I did not open it the day after. I have not opened it since. I do not know if the tapping man in my dream was a memory of the tapping man in the woods or if he was something else. I do not know if the offer in the dream was a real offer, made in some way I cannot follow, from a person who knew, somehow, that I had failed to spread the ashes at the chapel. I do not know if the tin is safe to keep on my shelf. I have moved it once. About a month after the dream, I took it down from the shelf above the sink, and I put it in a drawer with my socks, where I would not have to look at it every day. It was in the sock drawer for about a week. Then I moved it back to the shelf. I do not know why I moved it back. It felt worse in the drawer. It felt like I was hiding something. It sits on the shelf now, between the pennies and the ceramic bowl. It has not moved since. I have not been back to the chapel. I have not been back to the bouquet crossing. I have not been on any part of that spur trail. Ben's ashes are still in the skull tin, and the skull tin is on the shelf above my kitchen sink, next to a jar of pennies and a small ceramic bowl my mother made me in the year she went to a pottery class and gave up after 4 sessions. The skull tin sits between the pennies and the bowl, and it does not move. I look at it every day. I have not opened it. I do not know if I will ever open it. The last thing. 2 months ago, I was hiking with a woman I have started seeing. Her name is Marla, and she is a physical therapist who came into the lumber yard one Saturday looking for cedar planks for a raised bed she was building, and I helped her load them, and one thing had led to another in the way it does when you are in your 30s and living in a small town, and both of you are lonely enough to look. Marla is younger than me by about 5 years. She was married once, briefly, in her 20s, to a man who did not deserve her and had gone to work at a private security company in North Carolina. She has a scar on her lower lip from a childhood dog bite that she is self-conscious about, and I like more than any other thing about her face. She laughs at things I do not think are funny, and she does not laugh at things I do, and this is the healthiest thing about our arrangement. She keeps me from thinking my sense of what is funny is the only sense of what is funny, and I have needed that. Marla likes to hike. Marla hikes at Prospect Mountain and at Cat Mountain and at little day-use trails around Bolton Landing. Easy things, in and out in 3 hours. I have been going with her because it is what she likes and because I do not want to lose her. I had not told her about Ben. I had told her I had a younger brother who had passed. She had not asked how. Marla is a person who lets you tell her things when you are ready. That is another one of the healthiest things about our arrangement, and it is also the thing I am most afraid of, because there is only so long a person can stay ready to tell somebody a thing before the not telling becomes its own kind of lie. We were on Cat Mountain on a Sunday in September. It was a beautiful morning, blue sky, cold air, the leaves just starting to turn. There were maybe 15 other cars in the trailhead lot when we started. It was a busy Sunday. There were families ahead of us and families behind us. It was not the woods east of the Dix Range. It was not the chapel. It was a mile and change of well-maintained trail to a lookout, and half of the people on it were wearing sneakers. About a third of the way up, off to the right of the trail, in a hemlock stand between 2 switchbacks, I saw a tree with 4 holes in it, perfectly spaced. Chest height, clean drilled holes. Nothing in the holes. No aluminum tube, no wooden dowel, just the holes. I stopped. I stopped so fast that Marla, who was behind me, walked into my pack. She said, "Sorry, honey, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah," and I made myself keep walking. I did not look at the tree again. I did not look at any of the other hemlocks. There were plenty of hemlocks. I did not look at any of them. On the way down, when we got to the same switchback, I looked. I could not stop myself. The tree was still there. The holes were still there. There was nothing else on the tree. But at the base of the tree, in the duff, there was a little pile of pine needles pushed up against the trunk, and the pine needles were pressed down in the middle in a shape I could not see. It was the shape of a hand, a large hand, pressed into the pine needles at the base of the tree, like a man had been kneeling there, and had leaned forward on his palm, and had gotten up and gone, and had left the shape of his hand. The shape was maybe 8 hours old. It could have been from anybody. It could have been from a Cat Mountain family with a big dad. It probably was. I did not tell Marla. Marla is a person who does not need to know. Marla is a person who I would like to keep, and she cannot keep me if she is scared of me, and if I told her about the tapping man, she would either be scared of him or scared of me. Neither of those things helps. I looked at the handprint in the pine needles. I looked at the tree. I could hear, faint and far off, some family calling to their dog somewhere back at the parking lot. I could hear the wind in the hemlocks over my head. It was a shushing sound. Ben had loved that sound. Then, from somewhere further up the mountain, above where we had been, above where the lookout was, I heard, very quiet, one drip. Just one. I took Marla's hand. I walked her down the mountain. I did not stop again. In the parking lot, I loaded her cedar planks, which we had not bought that day but had bought weeks before, into the back of her truck, because she had driven, and I told her I was going to sit in the passenger seat for a minute with my eyes closed because I had a headache coming on. She kissed the side of my head. She said, "Poor baby." She got in the driver's side and she started the truck and she waited for me. I sat in the passenger seat with my eyes closed. I could feel the compass in my chest pocket. I had started carrying it again in the last month without meaning to. I had put it in the same pocket where I keep my wallet, and every morning when I got dressed, my hand had gone to it and put it in the pocket without asking. I sat there and I felt the compass, and I thought about the drip. I thought about it a long time. I have thought about it every day since. I still have the tin on my shelf. I still have not opened it. I have not been back into the deep woods. I do not know if I ever will. Marla does not know about any of this, and I do not know if I will ever tell her. My father calls on Sundays. My mother does not call. The lumberyard is fine. My life is fine. There is only one thing. Sometimes at night, when the apartment is quiet and I am lying in the dark with Marla asleep next to me, if the wind is still and the traffic on the road outside has died down, I hear something at the window. It is not a drip, not exactly. It is a soft, slow tap, very slow, not regular, once every 20 seconds or so, at the glass. The first time I heard it, I got up and I checked the window. There was nothing at the window. There was no branch touching the glass. There was no leak. There was no bird. I do not check the window anymore. I lie in bed and I listen to the tap, and after a while it stops, and I go back to sleep. And in the morning, on the sill outside my window, there is nothing, nothing at all. I check every morning. Last week, though, on a Tuesday, when it had rained overnight and the sill was wet, I saw something in the wet that was not there in the dry. There were 4 small round marks in the paint, perfectly spaced, chest height to a man standing at the flower bed below my window. Round marks, about the diameter of a dime, in the dust that had settled on the sill over the summer and washed into a slurry with the rain. The rain had held the marks in place. They had not been made by rain. They had been made by something touching down, slow, 4 times, in a row, in the shape of the 4 holes on the trees. I stood at the window in my shorts, and I looked at the marks, and I did not touch them. I made coffee. I got dressed. I went to work. When I came home, the marks were gone, because the sill had dried in the afternoon sun, and the dust had blown away. I did not tell Marla. I have taken to sleeping with the window closed. I have taken to sleeping with the shade drawn. I have taken, without really meaning to keeping the skull tin on my nightstand now, within arm's reach. I do not know why. I do not know if the tin protects me. I do not know if it makes me easier to find. All I know is that Ben is in that tin, and that the tin is next to my bed, and that when the tap comes at the window, I am the one who hears it, not Marla. and that when I get up in the morning the tin has been where I put it, and I have not opened it. I do not know if the tapping man is out there. I do not know if I brought him back with me. I do not know if it was already on Cat Mountain before us, and I only recognized it because I knew to look. I do not know if the drip I heard on that mountain was real, or if the drip I hear at the window is real, or if I am quietly and without wanting to, going the same way my brother went. I do not know, but I know this. I have not opened the tin. I will not open the tin. If the tapping man wants my brother, he will not get him from me. If the tapping man wants me, he can come and take me. But he does not get Ben. He walked into my clearing on the afternoon of the 4th day. I had just gotten the second pole seated in the tent, and I was on my knees with the mallet in my hand, and I looked up, and there was a man in a business shirt standing at the far edge of the meadow watching me. I did not move for a second. The mallet stayed in my hand. My other hand was on the tent pole. I remember the way the light was, that particular slant of late afternoon in the Wind Rivers when the sun is behind the peaks and the whole valley goes copper, and I remember thinking, in the small quiet part of my head that had not yet caught up to what was happening, that a man in a white dress shirt was not a thing that fit in that light. He was maybe 40 yards off, late 30s, early 40s, medium build, a little shorter than average. He was wearing dark slacks and a white button-up and a dark tie that he had loosened at the collar. His shoes were black leather dress shoes, and they were muddy at the toes but not scuffed. He had no pack, he had no hat, he had no water bottle, he had no jacket. He held his hands at his sides, and he did not wave. I stood up. I put the mallet on the log I was using for a bench. I did not step toward him. I did not step back. I let my right hand rest on my belt, where it would have been near the pistol if the pistol had been on my belt, which it was not, because the pistol was in the pack, which was in the tent, which was half up. My hand went there anyway. Habit. 6 years in the army had put my hand there, and civilian life had not been long enough yet to make my hand forget. I said, "Afternoon?" He said, "Where are we?" His voice was normal. He had a normal voice. Middle American, no accent to place. A little dry from what I would have guessed was thirst, but might have been something else. He did not seem out of breath. He should have been out of breath. He had walked into my clearing from the west, which meant he had come up over the pass, and the pass was at 10,200 feet, and I had come up over it that morning with my pack on, and I had been out of breath for an hour after. I said, "You are in the Wind River Range, about 30 miles east of Pinedale." He said, "Wyoming." I said, "Yes." He said, "How did I get to Wyoming?" I looked at him. He looked at me. I could see his face pretty clearly now that he had taken a couple of steps closer. He had not moved his arms while he was doing it. He had walked with them at his sides, like a man carrying 2 invisible buckets. His face was pale but not sunburned, which was strange for 4 days above 9,000 feet at that time of year. His hair was black and combed. His shirt was tucked in. He had a wedding ring on his left hand. I said, "You tell me." He said, "I don't know." I said, "What is the last thing you remember?" He said, "Leaving my office on Wednesday." I said, "It is Sunday." He said, "Then I have been missing for 4 days." That was not the way a person talks. A person in that situation would have said, "Has it been 4 days?" A person would have made it a question or an exclamation or a small horror. He said it the way you would confirm a lunch order, 2 burgers and a Coke. "Then I have been missing for 4 days." I did not point that out. I said, "What is your name?" He looked at me for a long time before he answered. Long enough that I could see, or I thought I could see, something behind his eyes doing a small calculation. Then he said, "Jim." I said, "Jim what?" He said, "Jim Hendricks." I said, "All right, Jim. Where do you live?" He said, "Colorado Springs." I said, "That is a long way from here." He said, "Yes, that was the whole introduction. I want it down that way because that was as much as I ever got out of him about himself that I later had any reason to trust." He never gave me a middle name. He never gave me an employer, though later he made references to an office and to a boss and to a woman named Angie who ran the reception desk. He never told me the name of his wife. He never showed me a picture on his phone, because he did not have a phone. He never mentioned children, though the wedding ring said he was married, and he was old enough, and he had that thin, worn look around the eyes that fathers of young kids have. He was not Jim Hendricks. That much is worth putting down first. I do not know who he was, and I do not know if he had ever been Jim Hendricks. And I do not know if there was a real Jim Hendricks in Colorado Springs, whose identity he was borrowing, or whether he had made it up whole cloth on the spot. But he was not Jim Hendricks. 2 years later, on a Friday night in Cheyenne, I sat in a public library in front of one of their computers, and I ran every search I could think of. And the closest Jim Hendricks I could find in Colorado Springs was a retired dental hygienist in his 70s, and it was not the same person. There was no other Jim Hendricks in Colorado Springs. There was no Jim Hendricks anywhere in Colorado who fit the age and the description. There was no missing persons report from that Wednesday in September of that year for anybody in Colorado matching the shirt and the shoes and the wedding ring and the pale, unsunburned skin. He was not Jim Hendricks. I did not know that yet. On the afternoon of the 4th day, at the edge of my clearing in the Wind Rivers, I looked at him and I thought, this is a man who has had a stroke, or this is a man who has taken something, or this is a man who has been in some kind of accident and does not know it yet. He was the wrong shape for the wilderness, and his shoes were the wrong shoes, and his shirt was the wrong shirt, and his face was the wrong face for a person who had been out here for 4 days. I said, Jim, come sit down. He walked over. Even unhurried steps. He came to the log where the mallet was, and he stopped in front of it, and he did not sit. I gestured. He looked at the log, the way you look at a chair somebody has offered you, at a house you have not been in before, and then he sat down, slow, careful, the way somebody does when they are unsure of their knees. I got him water. He drank it without holding the bottle to his mouth for very long, which meant he was not that thirsty. I got him a granola bar. He ate it slow, and did not seem to enjoy it, and did not seem to dislike it. I sat down on the ground across from him, not too close, and I put the mallet within reach, and I asked him one more time if he was hurt. He said no. I said, you want me to check your head? He said no. I said, you feel dizzy? He said no. I said, how is your vision? He said, fine. I said, Jim, I have to be honest with you. Something is not adding up here. He said, I know. I said, you want to try to piece it together? He said, I would like to just sit for a minute, if that's all right. I said, sit as long as you want. He sat. He sat looking at his knees, not looking around, not looking up at the peaks, not looking at the tent. A man in his position, a man who did not know how he had gotten to Wyoming, would have been looking around. Any regular person would have been trying to place the country, trying to remember, trying to see anything familiar. Jim looked at his knees. I looked at his shoes. I looked at his slacks. I looked at the cuffs of his slacks. And the cuffs of his slacks had mud on them, but the mud was in the wrong places. The insides of the cuffs, up near the ankle, were clean. The mud was only on the outside, where you would put mud on if you had scuffed the cuffs against dirt intentionally. If a person had walked through mud for any length of time, mud would have gone up the inside of the pant leg. It would have splashed on the sock. It would have gotten inside the shoe. Jim's socks, what I could see of them, were clean. Jim's shoes were muddy on the toe and clean along the heel and clean along the top of the leather where the tongue met the vamp. I did not say anything about the mud. I said, well, Jim, it is getting on toward evening. Why don't we finish getting my camp set up, and we will have something hot to eat, and we will figure out what to do with you in the morning. He said, thank you. I finished setting up the tent. I did not let him help. I told him he should rest, and he did rest, which is to say he sat on the log and looked at his knees. I got the poles seated, and the rain fly on and the guy line staked out, and I got the little whisper light stove out and I lit it and I put a pot of water on for pasta. I had brought enough food for 8 days. I had brought too much food. I have been a man who overpacks since the army, because in the army you never knew and there was no store, and civilian life had not gotten that habit out of me either. If I had to feed him too, I could feed him too. I had extra. While the water heated, I sat down opposite him with my back against my pack, and I watched him. I wanted to see what he did when he thought I was not looking. That is one of the things the army had drilled into me. You watch a person when they think they are unwatched. That is when you see who they are. Jim did not do much. Jim looked at his knees. Now and then he raised his head and looked at me. When he did not blink. I mean, he did blink. Sometimes. But not on the beat you would expect. Sometimes it was a normal blink. Sometimes it was a long, slow blink that started when he looked up and ended after he had already been looking at me for a couple of seconds. Sometimes I watched him for a full minute and he did not blink at all. He did not stare. He did not narrow his eyes. He looked at me the way a person in a waiting room looks at the receptionist, just looking past me at some middle distance that had my face in it but was not focused on my face. I let him do it. I let him sit. I did not push. I asked him if he had allergies. He said no. I asked him if he could eat pasta. He said yes. I made the pasta. I put a can of sauce in it. I split it into 2 mess kits, and I handed him one, and I gave him a plastic fork. He said thank you. He held the mess kit on his knee. He did not eat right away. He waited until I had started eating, and then he took a small bite, and he chewed it a long time, and he swallowed, and he took another small bite. He was not enjoying the pasta. He was not disliking the pasta. He was performing eating. I was pretty sure by now that Jim Hendricks had never eaten pasta in his life. I did not say that either. I ate my food. I drank some water. I looked at the sun going down behind the ridge, and I looked at the way the copper light turned to a deep, long blue, and then to nothing. And I put more wood on the fire I had built next to my stove. And I asked him if he wanted to sleep in the tent or if he wanted me to break out the emergency bivvy. I only had one bag. The bag was mine. But I could put him in the bivvy and he could sleep under the flyout one end of the tent and it would be warm enough for him and I could keep the entry between us. He said, "The tent is fine, if you don't mind. It's cold." I said, "The tent will be tight for 2. He said, "That's all right." That was where I made my first mistake. I know it now. I do not know that I would make a different decision if I had it back, because I could not have left a confused man in his dress shirt out under a bivvy fly at 9,000 feet in September and slept well myself. But the mistake was letting him in the tent. The mistake was letting him inside my one small closable space with my pack and my pistol and my knife and my sleeping bag and me. He did not touch anything that first night. He crawled in when I told him it was time. He lay down on my extra pad. He accepted a wool sweater I had brought and did not need to use as a pillow. He turned to face the wall of the tent, and he did not move. He did not snore. He did not shift. I lay on my back next to him with my hand on the sheath of my knife, which was on my hip, which was outside the sleeping bag, and I stayed awake until well past midnight, and then I slept in fits. And every time I woke, he was exactly where he had been. Not a hand different, not a foot different, same position, same slow breathing. At about 3 a.m. I heard him say something. It was quiet. It was one word. He said it in a whisper, and his voice was not exactly his voice. It was, and it was not. It was the same voice, but the voice was flatter, and the word was one syllable, and I did not catch it. I lay there in the dark next to him, and I said, "Quiet, Jim." He did not respond. I said, "Jim, are you awake?" He did not respond. His breathing kept up the same slow rhythm. I lay there and I listened to his breathing, and I told myself I had misheard. Around dawn, I fell into a real sleep. When I woke up, the sun was already up, and Jim was sitting outside the tent on the log where he had sat the afternoon before, in the exact same posture, looking at his knees. He had not made any noise getting out. He had not zipped the tent behind him. I got dressed. I checked my pack. Nothing was out of place. My pistol was in the hidden pocket I had sewn into the pack years before, and the pistol was where I had left it. My roll of cash was tucked into the ammo pouch inside the same pocket, and it was where I had left it. My compass was in the top zipper, and the compass was where I had left it. Nothing had been moved. I crawled out of the tent. Jim looked up at me. He said, "Good morning." I said, "Good morning, Jim." He said, "How did you sleep?" I said, "Fine." He said, "I slept well too, I think. It's been a while since I slept well." That was the first sentence he had spoken to me that did not sound like a hostage answering a question. That was the first sentence he had spoken to me that had unprompted information in it. I clocked it. I said, "How long has it been?" He looked at me. He smiled. It was a small smile, a friendly one, not a full smile, and it was the smile of a man who had just been asked a question he had not expected. He said, "I don't remember. I need to tell you a little about me before I keep going, or the rest is not going to make sense. My name is Cal. I was, at the time of all this, 29. I had done 6 years in the Army as a small unit infantryman, most of it at Fort Carson, some of it in a place I do not talk about. And I had gotten out of the service 2 years before I met Jim Hendricks, and I had not settled into anything in the 2 years since. I had a room I rented in a house in Riverton, Wyoming, where I paid $450 a month to a woman named Dot, who did not care what I did as long as the rent was on time. I worked seasonal jobs. I did some backcountry outfitter work in summer. I did some snowplow driving in winter. I fixed people's fences. I put in fence posts. I was saving money to do a thing. I did not yet know what the thing was, and every dollar I saved went into an old ammo can in a floorboard cavity under the head of my bed. I had a sister named Ray who lived in Denver and worked as a paralegal, and I had not spoken to her in 8 months. That was on both of us. Ray had married a man neither my mother nor I could stand, and I had said so at their wedding rehearsal after too much beer, and Ray had not spoken to me since, and I had missed her every day. That was the reason for the trip. I had planned an 8-day solo in the winds, deep, off any of the main loops, because I needed to be somewhere I could not check my phone, and I could not check my email, and I could not check anything at all, because otherwise I was going to keep waiting for Ray to reach out to me, and Ray was not going to reach out to me until I reached out to her, and I was not going to reach out to her until I had figured out what to say. I carried the pistol, because I always carried the pistol. It was a small Glock, the 26, chambered in 9mm. I had bought it when I got out of the service. I did not hunt with it. I did not target shoot with it much. I carried it because I had spent 6 years never being farther than 6 inches from a rifle, and civilian life without a firearm felt to me the way going out of the house without pants would feel to a normal person. It was in the false bottom of my pack. It was in the false bottom in a small nylon holster, and it was loaded, and it had one in the pipe. I did not tell people about it. I did not talk about it. My sister knew I carried, and Dot, my landlord, knew I carried, and that was about the extent of it. I had the pistol on me when Jim walked into my clearing. I mean, it was in the pack, and the pack was in the half-up tent, but I could have had it in my hand in about 8 seconds. That was one of the things that had let me sit down and have pasta with him and let him crawl into the tent with me. I want to be clear about that. If I had thought I was truly at his mercy at any point on that first evening, I would not have shared a tent with him. I would have put him in a bivvy under the stars, and I would have sat up all night with the pistol in my lap. I did not do that. I did not do that because I had counted him as manageable, and I had counted myself as, if not exactly safe, then at least prepared. So, back to it. Jim Hendricks and I broke camp on the morning of the 5th day. I told him we were going to walk out. I told him that if we walked hard, we could make my truck at the Elkhart Park trailhead in 3 days. I told him that if we walked easy, 4. I told him we would walk hard because he did not have gear, and I did not want him spending any more nights out than he had to. He said that's fine. I loaned him a pair of gaiters and a spare thin fleece, and a wool watch cap out of the top of my pack. I did not loan him boots. Boots you cannot loan out. Boots would tear his feet up. He would have to walk in his dress shoes. I told him this. He said, "That's fine." He was, that morning, a better hiker than he had any right to be. We started down the game trail I had come up on. It was steep going down. The trail switchbacks about 6 times over the first 2 miles, and then it opens out into a wide creek bottom that runs for another 5 miles before it starts to climb again toward the pass on the other side. That first 2 miles off the shoulder is a stretch that had taken me 3 hours of hard work coming up, and coming down I had allowed us 4 because Jim was in dress shoes, and dress shoes on steep granite are a good way to break a leg. Jim did not break a leg. Jim did not slip. Jim did not even breathe hard. Jim went down the switchbacks behind me at exactly my pace, half a step back, and every time I looked over my shoulder to check on him, he was there, close enough to touch, looking straight ahead. I stopped, once, at a place where the trail cut across a talus field and the footing was tricky. I stopped to catch my own breath. I turned to check on him. He stopped too. He waited. He did not sit. He stood, half a step back in his dress shoes on the talus, and he did not shift his weight from one foot to the other, and he did not adjust his stance, and he did not look at the view. He waited. I said, "You doing okay?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Legs holding up?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Feet all right?" He said, "Yes." I looked at his shoes. His shoes were still muddy on the toes. They were not scuffed. He had come down 1.5 miles of granite talus behind me, and he had not scuffed his shoes. I said, "All right, let's keep going." We kept going. We got to the creek bottom around noon. I stopped for water and to look at the map and to eat some jerky. I offered Jim jerky. He took a piece. He chewed it a long time. He swallowed. He did not take another piece. I did not offer him another piece. I looked at the map. I did some math in my head. I told him we were going to try to make about 11 miles that day, camping at a spot I knew below a set of falls that I did not name. He said, "Sounds good." He said, "Sounds good." That was the second sentence he had spoken to me that did not sound like a hostage answering a question. Sounds good. It was the kind of thing an ordinary man would say. It was slotted into his sentence in the right rhythm. It was calibrated. That was the word that came to me. Sitting on that rock with the map on my knee, Jim Hendricks was calibrated. He was watching me, and he was calibrating himself to how I talked. He was picking up my rhythms and using them back at me. He had gotten the sounds good from me the night before, when I had said sounds good about the pasta. I put the map away. I stood up. I said, "Let's move." He stood up. We moved. We made the falls camp by 6 that evening. It was a wide gravel bar under a stand of lodgepole pine next to a creek that was loud with snowmelt even in September. There was a fire ring somebody had built years back. There was room for a tent and a fire and a cooking spot, all separate, the way you like it to be. I liked that spot. I had used it 3 times before. It was one of my favorites in the winds. I put Jim to work gathering firewood. I did this on purpose. I wanted to see what he was going to do with the task. I told him no branches thicker than his wrist and no wet stuff, and I told him to break everything to length before he carried it. And I sent him upstream along the gravel bar to a stretch where I had seen a lot of dry deadfall in the ponderosa on the bank. He went. He came back 40 minutes later with an armload of wood. Every piece was under a wrist thick. Every piece was broken to length, and every piece was broken to the same length, within a couple of inches. Every piece was dry. He had picked exactly what I had asked for. He had picked more than I had asked for. He had picked enough for 2 nights. He set it down at the fire ring, arranged in a neat pile, small pieces on top, medium in the middle, large at the bottom. I said, "That's a good pile of wood, Jim." He said, "Thank you." I said, "You ever camped before?" He said, "No." I said, "Boy Scouts." He said, "I don't remember." I lit the fire. He watched. He did not offer to help. He sat on a rock about 10 feet from the ring with his hands on his knees. I made dinner, rice and a can of beef stew. I fed him. He ate slow. He performed eating. He said, "Thank you." Around dark, he said, "Cal." I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you think we're being followed?" I stopped chewing. I looked at him across the fire. His face was orange with the flames, and the shadows moved in the hollows under his eyes and made him look older than he was. He was looking at me steady. He was not looking at his knees. I said, "No, Jim. I do not think we are being followed. There is nobody up here. There is nobody within 20 miles of us right now who I did not put here." He said, "I've been feeling it since about noon." I said, "Feeling what?" He said, "That someone is behind us." I said, "Jim, we are going to be all right. Nobody is following us. Nobody knows we are up here." I did not tell anybody exactly where I was going, and there are no cars at the trailhead I saw when I came in, and there is no reason to believe anybody has any interest in us. He said, "All right, I trust you." He went back to his food. He kept eating slow. He kept performing eating. But he had rattled me. I want to be honest about that. He had rattled me because I had in fact been feeling something like that myself since about the middle of the day. Not that we were being followed. That was too specific. It was more like the feeling you get in a dark house when you are up past your bedtime and everybody else is asleep and there is nothing wrong at all, but the back of your neck knows something you do not. That kind of feeling. I had been feeling it for about 6 hours, and I had been pretending I was not feeling it, and Jim had reached across the fire and put a name on it, and I did not like that he had. I said, "Jim, I need you to tell me why you think someone is behind us." He said, "I heard something." I said, "What did you hear?" He said, "A step." I said, "One step." He said, "One step." About an hour ago, on the trail behind us, when you stopped to look at the map. I had stopped to look at the map an hour ago. I had not heard a step. I said, "What kind of step?" He said, "A boot." I said, "A person." He said, "A person." I said, "You are sure?" He said, "I am sure." I ate the rest of my food. I did not enjoy it. I made him wash his mess kit in the creek. I made mine. I put the food bag up in a tree, high on a line, out of reach of any bear that might have been curious about our smell, though there had been no bear sign anywhere in the winds that I had seen that trip. I checked the perimeter of the camp with my flashlight. I walked out about 50 yards up the trail behind us and back, and I stood at the edge of the light of the fire and I listened. I did not hear anything. There was no boot step, there was no rustle, there was only the creek and the wind in the pines and the ordinary sounds of a mountain night. I came back to the fire. I said, "There's nobody there, Jim." He said, "All right." I said, "We are going to bed. Same setup as last night. You take the pad and the sweater. I take the bag. If you have to piss, wake me up first." He said, "All right." We got in the tent. I lay on my back with my knife next to my hip outside the bag, and Jim lay on his side facing the wall, exactly the way he had lain the night before. He did not shift. He did not move. Around midnight I fell into a light sleep, and around 2 a.m. I woke up because Jim had moved. He had rolled onto his back. He was staring at the roof of the tent. His eyes were open. His hands were folded on his chest. I lay there next to him, and I said, "Quiet, Jim." He did not respond. I said, "Jim, are you awake?" He turned his head, just his head, toward me. In the dark I could barely see his face, but I could see his eyes, and his eyes were open. He said, "I am awake." I said, "Something wrong?" He said, "No." I said, "You should sleep." He said, "I will." He turned his head back. He looked at the roof of the tent again. He did not close his eyes. I lay there next to him and I watched him not close his eyes. And after a while I closed mine, because I could not stand watching him anymore. And I told myself I was going to stay awake and listen to his breathing. And I did stay awake for what I thought was the whole night. And when I opened my eyes again, the sun was up and Jim was outside the tent, sitting on a rock looking at the creek. Day 6 was the day we called Predator Day, though we did not call it that at the time. That was what I called it later, in my head, and what I have called it since. It started fine. It started like day 5 had started. I made oatmeal on the stove. I fed him. He ate slow. He performed eating. He said thank you, We broke camp and we headed down the creek toward where the trail cuts up over a low saddle and drops into the next drainage. That was 10 miles that day. That was a hard 10 miles because there was a climb in the middle, but I had done it before and I knew it, and Jim was somehow keeping up, so I was not too worried. About an hour in, he touched my sleeve. I did not like being touched. I stopped and I turned. He put a finger to his lips. He whispered, "Someone is behind us." I whispered back, "I checked last night. There is nobody there." He whispered, "Not last night. Now." I stopped and I listened. I heard the creek. I heard the wind in the pines. I heard, faint, a raven somewhere off to the northeast. I did not hear anything else. I said, out loud, at a normal volume, "There's nobody behind us, Jim." He shushed me. He shushed me. He put his finger to his lips again, and he shushed me, and his eyes did not blink. He was looking past me, up the trail, at whatever he was hearing that I was not hearing, and I turned and I looked, and there was nothing on the trail. There was the trail, and there were the pines, and there was the sky. That was all. I said, at the same volume, "Jim, there is nothing there." He said in a low voice, "It is a person." I said, "It is not a person." He said, "It is a person, Cal, and it has been behind us since before we broke camp." I said, "Jim, you need to breathe. There is no one behind us. I am telling you. There is no one out here but us. If you need to sit down, sit down." He did not sit down. He kept his finger to his lips. He looked past me up the trail for another half a minute. Then he lowered his finger, slow, and he said, "All right, all right." It stopped. I said there was nothing there in the first place. He said, "All right." We kept walking. He kept doing it. He did it 4 more times before noon. Each time he grabbed my sleeve. Each time he whispered. Each time he pointed up the trail. Each time I stopped and listened, and I did not hear anything. And each time he waited for me to tell him it had stopped, and then he nodded and we walked on. Around noon, we came to a spot where the trail crossed a boulder field, and I stopped to rest. I sat on a rock. I got out my water bottle. Jim did not sit. He stood in the trail, 10 feet up from me, looking back the way we had come. I said, "Jim, come sit down." He did not sit down. I said, "Jim." He turned around, slow. He looked at me. He was not looking at his knees anymore. He was looking straight at me. His face was the same face it had been the whole trip, pale and unsunburned and calm. But something had changed. I could not have told you what. His eyes were still the same eyes. His mouth was still the same mouth. But there was a small shift somewhere in the whole cast of his face that made it look, for the first time, like a face I did not want to be in a boulder field alone with. He said, "Cal, you are not listening to me." I said, "I am listening to you, Jim." He said, "You are not. You are not taking me seriously." I said, "I am taking you seriously. I am telling you, there is no one there. I have been in these mountains a long time. I know how to tell if I am being followed. There is no one there." He said, "You are not listening." We looked at each other across those 10 feet of boulders for what felt like a long time. It was probably 4 seconds. It was probably 5. Then he blinked, the same long, slow blink, and he came and sat down on a rock about 6 feet from mine, and he did not say anything for a while. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry, Cal. I think I am tired." And I said, "You have every right to be tired, Jim." He said, "Thank you for putting up with me." I said, "Do not mention it." He said, "I mean it." I said, "I know." That was as much as we talked for the rest of the afternoon. We hiked. We made the saddle by 3. We came down the other side to a small alpine lake I knew about, with a good camp on the west shore, and we set up there. I made him gather wood again. He gathered wood again. Same neat pile. Same lengths. Same thickness. While he was gone, I checked my pack. I did not tell him I was going to check my pack. I sat there at the fire ring with the pack open, and I went through every pocket, top to bottom. Pistol still in the false bottom. Cash roll still in the ammo pouch. Compass still in the top zipper. Multi-tool still in the side. Nothing was missing. Nothing had been moved. I closed the pack, but I sat there for a while afterward. and I could not shake the feeling that something had been moved. That was as much as I could put a finger on. Nothing was missing, and nothing was out of place, but the pack felt different. The straps had been retightened. The zipper on the top had been closed in a way I did not close it. I always closed it left to right, and it was closed right to left. The buckle on the sternum strap was clipped, and I do not clip the sternum strap when I take the pack off, because I need to slip out of it. Somebody had gone through my pack. I sat there, and I thought about that. Jim came back with his neat pile of wood. He set it down. He sat on his rock. He did not say anything about being followed. He did not look up the trail. He looked at his knees. He was back to the way he had been on day 5 and day 4. I made dinner. I fed him. I fed me. I let the fire burn down. I said, "Jim, did you go through my pack today?" He said no. He said it without pausing. He said it without looking up. I said, "Yesterday." He said no. I said, "The night I met you." He said, "No, Cal." I said, "Jim, I am going to level with you. My pack has been gone through. Somebody has been in it. There is nobody up here but you and me. I want you to be straight with me. Did you go in my pack?" He looked up at me. His eyes were the same eyes. He looked at me steady. He said, "Cal, I have not touched your pack. I would not touch your pack. You have been very kind to me, and I would not do that." I looked at him. He looked at me. I did not know what to do with that. If he was lying, he was a good liar. If he was not lying, then somebody else was up here, and somebody else had gone through my pack, and the whole Predator Day thing had been true, and I had been dismissing him. If he was lying, then he was a man who had spent 5 days shadowing me, who could go through a pack without disturbing anything that mattered and without taking anything. I did not want either possibility. I said, "All right, Jim, I believe you." I did not believe him. I did not fully disbelieve him either. I did not know what I believed. I said, "Tomorrow we push hard. If we do 14 miles tomorrow, we sleep at a spot I know that is only a couple of miles from the trailhead. Day after tomorrow, we can be at my truck by lunch." He said, "That sounds good." I said, "You up for 14 miles?" He said, "Yes." He was too. He was up for it. That night I lay next to him in the tent, and I did not sleep. And around 3 a.m. he whispered again. One syllable, the same word he had whispered the first night. And this time I made it out. Or I thought I made it out. And it is one of the things I cannot get out of my head. He whispered the word, hunger. Just that word. Just once. In his flat sleep voice. Into the wall of the tent. Hunger. I did not sleep the rest of that night. I lay on my back with my knife in my hand under the sleeping bag, and I stared at the roof of the tent, and I listened to him breathe. His breathing kept the same slow rhythm it had kept every night. He did not whisper again. He did not move. If he was aware I was awake, he did not show it. I lay there, and I ran options in my head, and none of the options were good. Option 1 was to get up now, wake him, march him out at gunpoint, and get to the truck by hard hiking through the night. That would work. It would also mean pulling a pistol on a man who might be exactly what he said he was, and who might have done nothing but freak me out with 2 whispered words in his sleep and 1 weird conversation about being followed. If he was Jim Hendricks from Colorado Springs, and I marched him out at gunpoint through the dark on a granite trail in dress shoes, I was going to break his leg, and I was going to end my own life as I knew it. Option 2 was to keep going, do the 14 miles, sleep the last night, get to the truck. Once I had the truck, I had options. I had a phone in the truck that would ping the tower at Pinedale. I had a gas can. I had options. Option 3 was to lie to him about the route. Tell him we were going one way when we were going another, and steer him into a bad spot for him and a good spot for me, and then get some distance and get out fast. I lay there, and I ran the options. I went with option 2. Here's why, and I have thought about it a lot in the 2 years since. Option 2 was the wrong option, if he was what I was starting to think he was. Option 2 was the right option, if he was what he had told me he was. And I did not know which he was, and I could not know which he was until we got to the truck. Option 2 was the option that did not commit me to either theory. Option 2 was what a soldier calls waiting to see what develops. It is not a good option in a firefight. It is not a bad option out of one. I decided that if I woke him with a pistol at 3 a.m. based on one whispered word, and it turned out he was exactly who he said, I was going to be a man who had done a bad thing, and I could not be a man who had done a bad thing. Not with what was left over between me and my sister, not with what was left over from the service. So I lay there, and I waited for dawn. And when dawn came, I crawled out of the tent, and I made oatmeal, and I woke him gentle, and I told him it was time to walk. He said, "Sounds good." We walked. We did the 14 miles. It was a hard day, and he did it. His pace never broke. His breathing never went ragged. His dress shoes were still muddy on the toes and clean everywhere else. Around 3 p.m. he touched my sleeve once, and I stopped, and he whispered, "Behind us." I said, "There is nobody behind us, Jim." He said, "All right." We walked on. He did not touch my sleeve again. We made camp at the last spot, a stand of aspen just up from a small unnamed pond, about 2 miles from where the trail comes out onto the Forest Service road that leads to the trailhead. This was a spot I had used exactly once before. It was not a great camp. The ground was not level. There was no fire ring. There was some previous camper's charred can lying in the grass that I made a mental note to pack out. I set up the tent on the flattest patch I could find. I told Jim to stay near the tent. I told him I was going to walk down to the pond and wash my face, because I was tired and I stunk. I told him not to touch the pack. He said, "All right." I walked down to the pond. It was maybe 80 yards through aspen the whole way. The trunks are pale enough that even in that late light I could see back through them to where our tent was and where Jim was standing at the edge of the aspen watching me. I knelt at the pond. I splashed water on my face. I let the water sting my eyes. I looked at my own reflection in the pond, wavering, and I thought about my sister, and I thought about my mother, and I thought about the small distant town where I had grown up, and I thought about how much I wanted to be sitting in that town, in a bar I knew, with a beer in front of me, and Ray across the table with a beer in front of her, and I thought about how far I had come from that possibility and how far I still had to go, and I splashed more water on my face and I stood up. Jim was not where I had left him. I looked at the tent. He was not at the tent. I looked around the tent. He was not around the tent. I ran back up the slope to the tent, hand on the sheath of my knife on my hip, and when I got to the tent, I ripped the fly open and I looked inside, and my pack was where I had left it, and my sleeping bag was where I had left it, and everything was where I had left it, and Jim was not in the tent. I heard his voice behind me. He said, "Cal." I turned. He was standing about 10 feet off, in the aspen, between me and the pond, watching me. He said, "I heard something." I went to look. I said, "You were told to stay at the tent." He said, "I'm sorry." He came back to the tent. He sat on the log I had put there for a bench. He looked at his knees. I checked the pack again. Same thing. Nothing missing. Nothing moved that I could see. But the top zipper was closed right to left. The sternum strap was clipped. Somebody had been in it. I looked at Jim. Jim looked at his knees. I did not say anything. I got the stove out. I made dinner. We ate. He performed eating. I let the fire die. I said, "Jim, I am going to sit up tonight. You sleep." He said, "Are you sure? You have to walk out tomorrow." I said, "I am sure." He said, "All right." He got in the tent. He lay down. I sat by the dead fire with my back to a tree and my pistol out of the false bottom of the pack and in my lap, and I waited for morning. It was maybe an hour past dark when the men came. They came out of the aspen from the direction of the pond. 4 of them, flashlights on, fast, but not running. They came at me, and one of them, the one in front, shouted, Sir, hands where I can see them. We are law enforcement. I put the pistol down. I put my hands up. I did not fight it. I had 5 seconds to decide whether to fight it, and I did not. I had a pistol in my lap and 4 flashlights on me, and if they were what they were saying they were, then anything I did that was not exactly what they said was going to get me shot. If they were not what they were saying they were, I was also getting shot. In neither scenario was fighting them going to help. The one in front said, "Are you Cal?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Are you alone?" I said, "There is a man in that tent. His name is Jim Hendricks. I have been walking him out for 2 days. He walked into my clearing on the 4th day of my trip and did not know where he was." The one in front said, "Sir, stay where you are. Do not move." He nodded to 2 of the other men. They moved fast toward the tent. One of them threw the fly open. The other one had a flashlight in the tent. I heard the first one say, "Come out slow, hands first." Jim came out. He did not say anything. He crawled out of the tent with his hands out in front of him, and he did not resist, and he did not look surprised. He did not look at me. He did not look at the men. He looked at his knees. They cuffed him. They cuffed him with plastic zip cuffs. They did it fast, professional. They stood him up and they turned him around, and one of them patted him down top to bottom, and the one who was patting him down said something quiet to the one who had first shouted at me, and the one in front nodded. The one in front turned back to me. He said, "Sir, you are safe. This man is a subject of a federal investigation. We are going to take him with us tonight. We are going to need you to remain here until we can debrief you. Understand?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You have any identification on you?" I said, "In the pack." He said, "Slow, please." I got my wallet out of the top of my pack slow, and I handed it to him. He looked at my ID. He handed the wallet back. He said, "Do you have any other weapons on your person?" I said, "Knife on the belt. Nothing else." He said, "The pistol is registered to you." I said, "Yes." He said, "You have a permit?" I said, "Yes." He said, "The pistol will be returned to you before we leave. Please stay where you are." He walked over to where the other 2 men had Jim. Jim was not fighting. Jim was not saying anything. Jim was standing between the 2 agents with his cuffed hands at his belly and his head down, and he was, I would swear to this in any court, smiling. Not big. Small. A very small smile at one corner of his mouth. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at the agents. He was looking at the ground in front of him, and he was smiling, small and private, the way a man smiles at a good hand of cards. The agents did not seem to notice. They picked him up between them, one on each arm, and they started walking back down the way they had come, toward the pond, toward the road, and Jim went with them. He did not turn around. He did not say goodbye. He did not say anything at all. The one in front stayed with me a minute longer. He looked at me. He said, "Are you all right?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "You are all right. You did the right thing keeping him with you. You are going to be fine." I said, "What is he?" He said, "I can't tell you that." "Sir, we cannot tell you anything about the case. What I can tell you is that this is a federal matter, and you did the right thing keeping him alive and calm. Now I need to be moving. Somebody will be back here for you within the hour. Stay put. Do not follow us. Do not attempt to contact anybody about this until we speak with you again." I said, "Am I in danger?" He said, "No. You are safe." He handed me my pistol. He had ejected the magazine. He put the pistol in my right hand and the magazine in my left hand, and he stepped back and he said, "Thank you for your service, Cal." He knew I had been in. I did not remember telling him. I did not remember him looking at my ID long enough to know that my ID was a civilian ID. He turned and he walked into the aspen in the direction the others had gone, and the flashlights got smaller and smaller, and then they were gone. I sat by the dead fire with the pistol in one hand and the magazine in the other, and I did not move for a long time. I do not know how long. Nobody came back for me within the hour. Nobody came back for me at all. I sat there until the sky got gray. I sat there until the sky got light. I sat there and I watched the aspen where the men had gone, and I watched the trail where they had gone, and I waited for them to send somebody back, and nobody came. When the sun cleared the ridge behind me, I finally stood up. I put the magazine in the pistol. I chambered around. I put the pistol in the holster in the false bottom of my pack. Then I put my hand back in the false bottom of the pack. Then I took my hand back out. The pistol was in the holster. The pistol was where I had put it. The cash roll was not. I want to be very careful here about the order of things, because it matters. I had put the pistol in the false bottom of the pack in the holster. I had put my hand back in to feel around for the cash roll, because I had a bad feeling. The cash roll was not there. It had been there when I checked the pack the evening before. It had been there when I checked the pack the day before that. It was not there now. I sat back down. I got the pack open all the way. I emptied it, item by item, onto the tarp, onto the tent fly. I emptied every pocket. I ran my hand along every seam. I looked at the map. I looked at the food bag. I looked at the stove. I looked at the mess kit. I looked at everything I had brought into the Wind Rivers. The cash roll was gone. It was not much money. It was about $340 in 20s, wrapped in a rubber band. It had been in the ammo pouch inside the false bottom pocket, tucked next to the pistol holster. Nobody who did not know about the false bottom pocket could have found it. The agents had not been in my pack. The agents had put my pistol in my hand, magazine in the other hand, and had walked away. They had not gone through my pack. Jim had gone through my pack. Jim had gone through my pack at least twice in the 2 nights he had slept next to me, and I had not noticed anything missing because I had not looked at the cache. I had only looked at the pistol and the compass and the multi-tool. He had known better than to take the pistol. Taking the pistol would have blown his cover. Taking the cache was smaller. Taking the cache was cash. He had known exactly what he could take without me noticing, and he had taken it. I sat there on the tarp with $340 gone from my life, and I thought about the mud on Jim's cuffs, and the way he had not scuffed his dress shoes on the granite, and the way he had performed eating, and the way he had said, "Sounds good," in my rhythm, and I thought, he was casing me. He was casing me the whole time. He was not lost. He knew exactly where he was. He had come into my clearing on the 4th day of my trip on purpose. He had picked me on purpose. He had come into my tent on purpose. He had gone through my pack on purpose. He had lifted the cache on purpose. And then somebody had picked him up. I packed up. I hiked out. It took me the whole morning. I got to my truck at the Elkhart Park trailhead a little after 1 p.m. The truck was where I had left it. The tires were the right pressure. The doors were locked. The key was in my pack where I had left it. The passenger side rear tire was flat, not slashed. Not flat because the valve stem had been cut. Flat because somebody had taken a knife and put it once, careful, into the sidewall, low in the back where you would not see it unless you walked all the way around the truck. It was a small, clean cut. Whoever had done it professional. I had a spare. I put the spare on. I did not stop looking over my shoulder the entire time I was doing it. There was nobody in the parking lot. There were 3 other cars in the lot, all frosted over from the night, all with dew on the windshields. I drove out. I did not tell anybody about any of it. When I got out, I did not have anybody to tell. I got back to Riverton late that night, and I unloaded my pack in my room, and I put the pistol in the safe I kept in the closet, and I put the empty ammo pouch on the top shelf, and I lay on my bed and I stared at the ceiling. I called Ray the next day. I did. I called my sister. I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand, and I called her, and she picked up on the 4th ring, and she said, "Quiet, cautious, Cal." I said, "Ray." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Ray, I am sorry about the wedding rehearsal. I am sorry about what I said. I was drunk, and I was wrong, and I have missed you every day since. And if you want me to come to Denver, I will come to Denver. I will apologize to your husband. I will apologize to you as many times as it takes." There was a long quiet on the phone. Then Ray said, "Come to Denver." So I went to Denver. I stayed with them for 4 days. I apologized. I apologized to her husband, who was gracious about it, and I apologized to my sister, and I met their little dog who had grown while I was not paying attention. I did not tell them about Jim Hendricks. I did not tell them about the men in the aspen. I did not tell them about the tire. I have not told anybody about any of it until now. Here is what I know. I know that Jim Hendricks did not exist as Jim Hendricks. I know that he had come out of the wilderness in Wyoming in a dress shirt and dress shoes, and had walked into my clearing without a pack. I know that his shoes had mud on the toes and clean everywhere else. I know that he did not blink on the right beat. I know that he performed eating. I know that he mirrored my speech within a day. I know that he whispered the word hunger in his sleep on the 6th night. I know that he went through my pack in a way that suggested he had done that before. I know that 4 men who identified themselves as law enforcement came out of the aspen at that camp and took him away, without a warrant they showed me, without an agency they named, without a case number they gave me. I know that the man in front knew about my service, and knew my name, and did not tell me his. I know that they promised somebody would come back for me within the hour, and nobody came back for me at all. I know that he took my cash. I know that somebody put a knife in my tire. I do not know if Jim was what I think he was, which is a predator who was casing me and biding his time and would have done something terrible to me on the last night if the agents had not come. I do not know if the agents were what they said they were, which is federal law enforcement who had been tracking Jim, or something else which I do not know how to name. I do not know if I handed a real man to something worse than him. I do not know if I saved myself from a real predator. I do not know if the tire cut was Jim's, done before he ever came into my clearing so that I would be delayed by exactly the amount of time he needed me delayed by. I do not know if the tire cut was the agent's, done to keep me at the trailhead a little longer so they could get further away. I do not know if the tire cut was third parties, done for reasons I have no way to guess at. I do not know any of these things. I still camp. Not alone. I do not camp alone anymore. I camp with 2 other guys I know from the outfitter work, who are decent men and who carry rifles, and who do not ask me why I like to sleep near the middle of a 3-man tent. I have gotten okay with camping in groups. I have not gotten okay with camping alone. I do not think I am going to. Ray and I talk on Sunday nights. She calls me. She has learned that I will not call first, even now, because I am worried she will let it go to voicemail, and I cannot bear to have my sister let me go to voicemail. So she calls me. We talk for an hour. Her husband is a good man. He was a good man the whole time. I was wrong about him. That is another thing I have had to sit with. Sometimes at night, when I am home alone in my rented room at Dot's house, I lie in bed and I think about Jim Hendricks. I think about him wherever he is. I do not know if he is in a cell somewhere. I do not know if he is walking around free. I do not know if the men who took him were real men or something wearing the shape of real men. I do not know if any of it happened the way I remember it. I think about him and I try to picture his face. Here is the thing. I cannot picture his face. I know all the details. Middle build, pale skin, combed black hair, dark tie, white shirt, wedding ring, muddy at the toes, clean at the heel. I know all of those things. But when I try to put them together into a face, the face slides out from under me. I cannot hold it. Every time I try, all I can hold is the small private smile he had at the end when the agents were leading him away. That smile I can hold. That smile I can see any time I want to. The rest of him is gone. I do not know what that means. I have thought about it a lot. I have decided in the 2 years since that I am glad the agents took him. I have decided that even if it turns out they were not what they said, even if it turns out I handed him over to something I do not want to think about, I am glad, because I lay in the tent with him for 3 nights. And I did not sleep. And I heard him whisper hunger. And I have to live with the fact that if the agents had not come, I would have had to make a decision on the seventh day about whether to walk him the last 2 miles to my truck. And I do not know what I would have decided. I do not know if I would have had the guts to do what I would have needed to do. I like to think I would have. I am not sure. That is the thing that keeps me awake when it keeps me awake. Not what happened to Jim, not what he was, what I would have been at the truck if the agents had not come, who I would have been on the drive down the mountain, alone in the cab with him, 20 miles from the nearest town, with the cash gone from my pack and the tire on the passenger side flat. I do not know who I would have been. I am pretty sure I would not have liked him.